It was an important day in the yard. Everyone was busy and excited, making notes and taking photographs. A special visitor had arrived and was now the centre of attention. "Who's that?" whispered Thomas to Duck. "That," said Duck proudly, "is a celebrity." "Oh, what?" asked Percy. "A celebrity is a very famous engine," replied Duck. "Driver says we can talk to him soon." "Oh," said Thomas, "he's probably too famous to even notice us." Just then, Gordon arrived. "Pah," said Gordon. "Who cares? A lot of fuss about nothing, if you ask me." And he steamed away. Later that night, the engines found that the visitor wasn't conceited at all. He enjoyed talking to the other engines till long after the stars came out. He left early next morning. "Good riddance," Gordon grumbled, chattering all night. "Who is he, anyway?" "Duck told you," said Thomas. "He's famous." "As famous as me?" huffed Gordon. "Nonsense." "He's famouser than you," replied Thomas. "He went 100 miles an hour before you were thought of." "So he says," snorted Gordon. "But I didn't like his looks. He's got no dome. Never trust domeless engines. They're not respectable. I never boast, but I'd say that 100 miles an hour would be easy for me." Duck took some trucks to Edward's station. "Hello," called Edward. "That famous engine came through this morning. He whistled to me. Wasn't he kind?" "He's the finest engine in the world," replied Duck. Then he told Edward what Gordon had said. "Take no notice," soothed Edward. "He's just jealous. Look, he's coming now." Gordon's wheels pounded the rails. "He did it, I'll do it. He did it, I'll do it." Gordon's train rocketed past and was gone. "He'll knock himself to bits," chuckled Duck. "Steady, Gordon," called his driver. "We aren't running a race." "We are, then," said Gordon, but he said it to himself. Suddenly, Gordon began to feel a little strange. "The top of my boiler seems funny," he thought. "It feels as if something is loose. I'd better go slower." But it was too late. On the viaduct, they met the wind. It was a teasing wind which blew suddenly in hard puffs. Gordon thought it wanted to push him off the bridge. "No, you don't," he said firmly, but the wind had other ideas. It curled around his boiler, crept under his loose dome, and lifted it off and away into the valley below. Gordon was most uncomfortable. The cold wind was whistling through the hole where his dome should be, and he felt silly without it. At the big station, the trucks laughed at him. Gordon tried to whisk them away, but they crowded round no matter what he did. On the way back to the shed, Gordon wanted his driver to stop and fetch his dome. "We'll never find it now," said the driver. "You'll have to go to the works for a new one." Gordon was very cross. "I hope the shed is empty tonight," he huffed to himself. But all the engines were there waiting. "Never trust domeless engines," said a voice from somewhere behind him. "They aren't respectable." Duck, the Great Western engine, worked hard in the yard at the big station. Sometimes he pulled coaches. Sometimes he pushed trucks. But whatever the work, Duck got the job done without fuss. One day, Duck was resting in the shed when the Fat Controller arrived. "Your work in the yard has been good. Would you like to have a branch line for your own?" "Oh, yes, please, sir," replied Duck. So Duck took charge of his new branch line. The responsibility delighted him. The line runs along the coast by sandy beaches till it meets a port where big ships come in. Duck enjoyed exploring every curve and corner of the line. Sea breezes swirled his smoke high into the air and his green paint glistened in the sunlight. "This is just like being on holiday," he puffed. "Well, you know what they say," laughed his driver. "A change is as good as a rest." Soon Duck was busier than ever. The Fat Controller was building a new station at the port, and Duck pushed the trucks wherever they were needed. Bertie looked after Duck's passengers, and the other engines helped too, but the work took a long time. Noise and dust filled the air. "Don't worry," whistled Toby. "The station's nearly finished." "And on time too," said Duck, thankfully. Duck felt his responsibility deeply and talked endlessly about it. "You don't understand, Donald, how much the Fat Controller relies on me." "Ugh, aye," muttered Donald sleepily. "I'm Great Western and I—" "Quack, quack, quack." "What?" "Ye heard? Quack, quack you go. Sounds like you'd an egg laid. Now wheesht and let an engine sleep." "Quack yourself," said Duck indignantly. Later, he spoke to his driver. "Donald says I quack as if I'd laid an egg." "Quack, do you?" pondered his fireman. He whispered something to Duck and his driver. They were going to play a joke on Donald and pay him back for teasing Duck. The engines were busy for the rest of the day and nothing more was said. Not even a quack. But when at last Donald was asleep, Duck's driver and fireman popped something into his water tank. Next morning, when Donald stopped for water, he found that he had an unexpected passenger aboard. A small white duckling popped out of his water tank. "Nay, do, who's behind this?" laughed Donald. The duckling was tame. She shared the fireman's sandwiches and rolled in the tender. The other engines enjoyed teasing Donald about her. Presently, she grew tired of travelling and hopped off at a station, and there she stayed. That night, Donald's driver and fireman got busy, and in the morning, when Duck's crew arrived, they laughed and laughed. "Look, Duck! Look what's under your bunker! It's a nest box with an egg in it!" Donald opened a sleepy eye. Will. You must have laid it in the night, Duck, all unbeknownst." Then Duck laughed too. "You win, Donald. It'd take a clever engine to get the better of you." There's a pond near the duckling station. Here she swims and welcomes the trains as they pass by. The station master calls her Dilly. To everyone else, she is always Donald's duck. One day, Edward was talking to Trevor when Douglas steamed by. He was pulling a train of heavy coal trucks. "Come on, Edward. Stop gossiping in the sun when there's work to be done." Later, Edward spoke to Douglas. "Trevor and I are old friends, and you and he have a lot in common too." "Och, aye," quizzed Douglas. "And what'd that be?" "Scrap," said Edward quietly. Douglas gasped. "Don't mention that word. It makes my wheels wobble." "It does the same to Trevor," replied Edward. "He was being sent to the scrapyard, but the vicar and I saved him, and now he's really useful again. Even so, the Fat Controller certainly does need another steam engine here." "Aye, and quickly," sighed Douglas. That night, Douglas was still working, He had taken the midnight goods train to a station at a faraway part of the island where only the diesels work. He was just shunting, ready for his return journey, when... That sounds like a steam engine, he thought. The hiss came again. Who's there? Asked Douglas. A whisper came. Are you a Fat Controller's engine? I intruded it. Thank goodness. I'm Oliver, and I'm with my brake van Toad. We've run out of coal and have no more steam. But what are you doing? Escaping. From what? Scrap. Douglas shivered. Then he remembered Edward's story about saving Trevor. I'll be glad to help you, he said. It'll have to look as if you're ready for scrap, and I'm taking you away. The drivers and firemen agree to help too. Everyone worked fast. No time to turn around, panted Douglas. I'll run tender first. Come on. But before they could clear the station, they were stopped. Aha! Exclaimed the foreman. A Great Western engine and a brake van too. You can't take these. Ah, but they're all for us, said Douglas's driver. See for yourself. The foreman looked all over Oliver. Seems in order. Right, away guard. A neat thing, puffed Douglas. We've had worse, smiled Oliver, and they forged ahead. It was daylight when their journey ended. We're home, cried Douglas. Shh, said his driver. There are the works. We'll find a place for Oliver. Oliver said goodbye and thank you, and Douglas puffed away. The next day, Douglas told the other engines all about Oliver. The Fat Controller will have to know, said James. Douglas should tell him at once, added Gordon. Well, here he is, said a voice. Now, what's this all about? Beg pardon, sir, but we do need another engine. Yes, sir, ventured Gordon. A steam engine, sir. I'm afraid that unless one is saved from scrap, there's little hope. But, sir, burst out Douglas, one has. Yes, indeed. And thanks to you, Douglas, he is now at our works. Oliver is just what we need for Duck's branch line. Everyone cheered. Now Oliver and Toad are mended and painted in full Great Western colours. Duck and Oliver are happy on their branch line. The others laughed at first and called it the Little Western. Duck and Oliver were delighted, and so the Little Western it will always be. The island of Sodor had many visitors, and the Fat Controller had scheduled more trains. Gordon, the big engine, had to work harder than ever before. Come on, he called to the coaches. Come on, come on, come on. The passengers rely on me to be on time. Whenever Gordon finished one journey, it was time for another to begin. Never mind, he puffed. I like a good long run to stretch my wheels. Even so, the Fat Controller decided that Gordon needed a rest. James shall do your work. James was delighted. He liked to show off his smart red paint and was determined to be as fast as Gordon. You know, little Toby, he boasted, I'm an important engine. Everyone knows it. I'm as regular as clockwork, never late, always on time. Says you. replied Toby. Just then the fat controller arrived. Your parts are worn, Toby, so you must go to the works to be mended. Can I take Henrietta, sir? No. What would the passengers do without her? Toby saw Percy by the water tower. Don't worry, Toby, said Percy. I'll take care of Henrietta until you get back. Soon Toby was out on the main line. He clanked as he trundled along. He's a little engine with small wheels. His tanks don't hold much water. He had come a long way and began to feel thirsty. In the distance was a signal. Good, he thought. There's a station ahead. I can have a nice drink and a rest until James has passed. Toby's driver thought so too. Toby was enjoying his drink when the signalman came up. He had never seen Toby before. Toby's driver tried to explain, but the new signalman wouldn't listen. We must clear the line for James with the express. You'll have to get more water at the next station. Toby clanked sadly away. Hurrying used a lot of water, and his tanks were soon empty. Poor Toby was out of steam and stranded on the main line. We must warn James, said the fireman. Then he saw Percy and Henrietta. Please, take me back to the station. It's an emergency. Henrietta hated leaving Toby. Never mind, said Percy. You're taking the fireman to warn James. That's a big help. Henrietta felt much better. James was fuming when he heard the news. I'm going to be late. My fault, said the signalman. I didn't understand about Toby. Now, James, said his driver, you'll have to push Toby. What, me? Me? Push Toby and pull my train too? Grumbling dreadfully, James set off to find Toby. He came up behind Toby and gave him a bump. Get on, you! James had to work very hard. When he reached the workstation, he felt exhausted. Some children were on the platform. Coo, said one. The express is late and it's got 2 engines. I think James couldn't pull it on his own, so Toby had to help him. Never mind, James, whispered Toby. They're only joking. Ha ha! Said James. James is a mixed traffic engine. He can pull both trucks and coaches. He's proud of his smart red paint, and so is his driver. Everyone says you brighten up their day, James. One morning, James whistled loudly at the other engines. Look at me. I am the smartest, most useful engine on the line. Rubbish, replied Thomas. We're all useful. The fat controller says so, and he's Sir Topham Hatt, head of the whole railway. You know what, James, added Percy. What? Replied James. You're getting all puffed up. James huffed away. Later, he was still boasting. I'm the pride of the line. I saw you pulling trucks today. You're only a goods engine, snorted Gordon. James was furious. I pull coaches too. Not as much as I do, grunted Gordon. The fat controller has plans for me. James was only making this up, but Gordon believed him. What plans? Wait and see. Oh dear, thought James. Now what'll I do? Thomas was shunting shining new coaches. Good morning, James. Are those coaches for me? Asked James hopefully. No, these are for Gordon's Express. I'll fetch your trucks next. But James was going to play a trick on the other engines. Actually, Thomas, I'm taking the coaches. The fat controller asked me to tell you. What about the trucks? Give them to Gordon. Come on, Thomas, said his driver. Orders are orders.
So when James's driver returned, James was coupled to the coaches and he puffed away. Thomas returned with the trucks. A few minutes later, Gordon arrived. "Where's the express?" Thomas told him about James, and so here are your trucks. Gordon was very cross, and so was his driver. "Wait till the Fat Controller hears about this." Meanwhile, James was enjoying himself enormously. "What a clever plan, what a clever plan," he chuffed. Then he saw the Fat Controller.
Some jokes are funny, but not this one, James. You have caused confusion.
"Yes, sir," said James.
You will stay in your shed until you are wanted.
The other engines teased James. "I wonder who'll be pulling the express today," said Gordon. "I expect it'll be you," replied Henry. "James is stuck in the shed for being silly." James felt sad. Next morning he went back to work. "Hello," whistled Thomas. "Good to see you out and about again." "I'm sorry I tricked you," said James. "Are these my trucks?" "Yes," replied Thomas kindly. "They are pleased to have you back." James puffed into the harbour with his goods train of trucks. He bustled about all day, pushing and pulling them into place. "Time to go home now, James," said his driver at last. "No trucks or passengers, just we two." But his driver was wrong. "Excuse me," called a man. "I have a meeting with Sir Topham Hatt and I mustn't be late. May I ride back with you?" "Of course," replied James's driver. Then he whispered to James, "This gentleman is a railway inspector." James was most impressed. He steamed along the line as smoothly and as quickly as he could. The Fat Controller was waiting and the railway inspector greeted him warmly. "This clever engine gave me a splendid ride. You must be proud of him."
Yes, indeed. James, once again, you are a really useful engine.
Thomas the Tank Engine was feeling bright and cheerful. It was a splendid day. "Good morning," he whistled to some cows, but the cows didn't reply. "Never mind," said Thomas. "They're busy with their breakfast." Next, he saw Bertie. "Hello, Bertie. Care for a race today?" But all Bertie could say was, "Ouch! That's another hole in the road." "I'm sorry, Bertie," smiled Thomas. Thomas was still in good spirits when Bertie arrived at the next station. "Bad luck, Bertie," said Thomas. "Now, if you were a steam engine, you would run on a pair of reliable rails." "Huh," replied Bertie. "The railway was supposed to deliver tar to mend the road 2 weeks ago. You can't trust a thing that runs on rails." "I run on rails. You can trust me, Bertie. I'll see if I can find out what's happened." Thomas left Bertie and made his way along the branch line towards the big station by the sea. James was snorting about in the yard. "It's too bad. Percy goes to work at the harbour and I do his job, here, there and everywhere." "Take that!" "Ooh!" groaned the trucks. "Just you wait, we'll show you." Gordon laughed.
I'll tell you what, James, if you pretended to be ill everywhere, you couldn't shunt trucks here or go to the quarry there, could you?
"What a good idea," agreed James. "Look, here comes Thomas. I'll start pretending now." Thomas was sorry to see the engines looking miserable. "Cheer up, it's a beautiful day."
Yes, grumbled Gordon, but not for James.
"What's the matter?"
He's sick, replied Gordon.
"Yes, he is. I am," stuttered James. I don't feel well at all." "Don't worry," said Thomas kindly. "I'll help out if you're ill." Gordon and James sniggered quietly to each other. Some of James's trucks were coupled behind Thomas, and he steamed away to the quarry.
The trucks were still cross. We couldn't pay James back for bumping us, so we'll play tricks on Thomas instead. One engine is as good as another.
But Thomas didn't hear them. He collected all the stone from the quarry and then set off back to the junction. Danger lay ahead. Now for our plan, giggled the trucks. Go faster, go faster. Slow down, called Thomas's driver and applied the brakes. Poor Thomas stood dazed and surprised in a muddy pond as a toad eyed him suspiciously. Bust my buffers, muttered Thomas. The day started so well too. Duck pulled away the trucks, and Edward helped Thomas back to the junction. Suddenly, Thomas remembered about the missing tar. He told Edward all about it. That's strange, said Edward. A truck full of tar has been left at my station. That must be it. Driver will make sure it gets to Bertie now. Later, James spoke to Thomas. I'm sorry about your accident, he muttered. And so is Gordon. We didn't mean to get you into trouble. No, indeed, spluttered Gordon. A mere misunderstanding, Thomas. All's well that ends well. Just then, Bertie arrived. He looked much more cheerful. My road's being mended now. Oh, I am glad, replied Thomas. Thanks for all you did. Now I know I can trust an engine, especially if his name is Thomas. Gordon and James puffed silently away to the shed. But Thomas still had company. Well, well, he sighed. What a day for surprises. The toad, who was looking forward to a ride home, noisily agreed. Trevor, the traction engine, was enjoying his work in the vicarage orchard. Birds were singing and apples were ripening on the trees. It was a lovely day. Hello, Trevor, said James. You look as bright and cheerful as my red paint. Oh, I am, replied Trevor. What's that noise? Asked James. It's the bees, laughed Trevor. They're all in these boxy things called beehives. I'm taking them to the station. The vicar says his bees make good honey and is giving some of them to his friends. Just then, Boko, the diesel engine, hummed in. Take care, you two. Don't make the bees angry. They might sting you. James didn't like being told what to do by a diesel, and he buzzed away. Goodbye, Trevor, called Boko, and set off to see Duck at the next station. Bill and Ben, the tank engine twins, were busy arranging trucks, but they scampered off when they saw Boko. I remember the first time I met those two, laughed Boko. They nearly made my eyes pop out. Edward soon put a stop to their games. Edward is the only one who can keep Bill and Ben in order, chuckled Duck. I sometimes call them the bees. A good name, replied Boko. They're terrors when they start buzzing around. James bustled in. What's that, Duck? He snorted. Are you afraid of bees? They're only insects after all, so don't let that buzzbox diesel tell you different. His name is Boko, and he didn't I wouldn't care, interrupted James. If hundreds were swarming around, I'd just blow smoke and make them buzz off. Buzz, 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 retorted Duck. The next morning, James arrived at the station to collect his coaches. The passengers were excited and keen to get on board. The platform was crowded, and the porter was in a hurry. Mind your backs, he shouted. Then there was trouble. The beehive fell and broke open. The station cleared like magic. James heard a familiar buzzing. The bees were too cold to be cross, so they buzzed around the fireman hoping he'd mend their hive, but he didn't understand, nor did his driver. So the bees turned to James. His boiler was nice and warm. Buzz off! Buzz off! Hissed James.
One bee burnt his foot. Ooh, ah, phew, phew. The bee thought James had burnt him on purpose. So it stung James right back on the nose. Eee! Whistled James. He had had enough. So had his fireman and driver. They didn't notice till too late that they had left all their coaches behind. They tried everything to get rid of the bees. First, they spun on the turntable, to no avail. They tried washing them off, but the bees clung harder to James's warm boiler. Then they tried smoking them off by going through a long tunnel. But still the bees wouldn't go away. It's no good, James, said his driver. We'll just have to go back to the orchard and fetch another hive. James's reply was drowned by the sound of buzzing. The vicar was waiting anxiously for James. When he arrived, the bees swarmed straight into their new home. Come on, James, said his driver. What you need now is a good hose down. Later that evening, James was resting in the shed when the vicar came to see him. Thank you for saving my bees, he said. It's a pity it's not Christmas, then we could call you James the Red-Nosed Engine. Everyone laughed, even James, but instead they decided to call James the Bee's Knees, which means they thought he was more useful than ever. Duck and Percy enjoy their work at the harbour, pulling and pushing trucks full of cargo to and from the quay. But one morning, the engines were exhausted. The harbour was busier than ever. The fat controller promised that another engine would be found to help them. Huh, it's about time, said Percy. I ache so much I can hardly get my wheels to move, agreed Duck. They waited for the engine to arrive. It came as a shock when he did. Good morning, squirmed Diesel in his oily voice. The two engines had not worked with Diesel for a long time. What are you doing here? Gasped Duck. Your worthy fat, Sir Topham Hatt sent me. I hope you are pleased to see me. I am to shunt some dreadfully tiresome trucks. Shunt where? Said Percy suspiciously. Where? Why, from here to there, purred Diesel, and again from there to here. Easy, isn't it? With that, Diesel, as if to make himself quite clear, bumped some trucks hard. Woo! Screamed the trucks. Grrr, growled Diesel. Percy and Duck were horrified. They did not trust Diesel at all. They refused to work and would not leave their shed. The fat controller was enjoying his tea and ice bun when the telephone rang. So there's trouble in the harbour yard? I'll be there right away. Diesel was working loudly and alone. Cargo lay on the quay. Ships and passengers were delayed. Everyone was complaining about the fat controller's railway. Percy and Duck were sulking in their shed. What's all this? Demanded the fat controller. We're on strike, sir, said Percy. Yes, added Duck. Beg pardon, sir, but we won't work with Diesel, sir. Then, in a quiet, hurt voice, he added, You said you'd sent him packing, sir. I have to give Diesel a second chance. I am trying to help you by bringing Diesel here. Now you must help me. He was the only engine available. Percy and Duck went sadly back to work. Next morning, things were no better. Diesel's driver had not put his brakes on properly, and Diesel started to move. He went bump straight into Percy. Percy had an awful fright. Wake up there, Percy, scowled Diesel. You have work to do. He didn't even say he was sorry to Percy. Later, Diesel bumped the truck so hard that the loads went everywhere. What will the
controller say?" gasped Percy.
"He won't like it," said Duck.
"So who's going to tell him, I wonder?" said Diesel. "Two little goody-goody telltales like you, I suppose." Percy and Duck did not want to be telltales, so they said nothing. Diesel, thinking he could get away with his bad behaviour, was ruder than ever. Next day, he was shunting trucks full of china clay. He banged the trucks hard into the buffers, but the buffers weren't secure. The silly trucks were sunk. Soon, the fat controller heard the news. The trucks were hoisted safely from the sea, but the clay was lost. The fat controller spoke severely to Diesel.
"Things worked much better here before you arrived. I shall not be inviting you back. Now, Duck and Percy, I hope you won't mind having to handle the work by yourselves again."
"Oh, no, sir. Yes, please, sir," replied the engines. Whistling cheerfully, they puffed back to work, while Diesel sulked slowly away. One morning, Thomas was being cleaned when Gordon arrived. Mud had blown all over his smart blue paint. "Hello, Gordon," called Thomas. "You look as if you've had a mud bath. Be a sensible engine. Have a shower instead."
Gordon snorted. "I haven't time to dawdle over my appearance like fussy little tank engines do."
The wind blew stronger. "Phew, Gordon, slow down," called his driver. This made Gordon even crosser.
"I'll be dirty and late, he hissed.
At the next station was a sign. All trains must wash down daily. James had just finished being cleaned. "Come on, Gordon," said his driver. "You'll feel better after a good hose down." "Pah!" said Gordon, and angrily let off steam. "You're a very naughty engine," said Gordon's driver. "Now James will need another shower. You'll have to wait your turn till later." "Good riddance," huffed Gordon. "I'm far too busy to waste time with water." He finished his journey safely and steamed into the big station. The fat controller was waiting. So were Gordon's coaches and the passengers.
"Goodness gracious," said the fat controller. "You can't pull the train. Henry will have to do it. Gordon, you'd better get clean straight away."
Gordon was soon being washed.
"Mind my eyes,"
he grumbled. Then he pulled trucks for the rest of the day. He bumped them hard. "That's for you, and you, and you."
"Trucks will be trucks," said James. "They won't with me," snorted Gordon. "I'll teach them."
James got ready to take the express when Gordon returned.
"Be careful," warned Gordon. "The hills are slippery and you may need help."
"I don't need help on hills," replied James huffily. "Gordon thinks he knows everything." Earlier, a storm had swept Gordon's hill, blowing leaves onto the track. Even though the storm had passed, the hill was still difficult to climb. James knew this. The signal showed clear and James began to go faster. "I'll do it. I'll do it," he puffed. Halfway up, he was not so sure. "I must do it. I must do it." But his wheels slipped on the leaves. He couldn't pull the train at all. "Help! Help!" whistled James. His wheels were turning forward, but the heavy coaches pulled him backwards. The whole train started slipping down the hill. His driver shut off steam and put on the brakes. Then carefully, he stopped the train. Gordon saw everything.
"Ah, well, we live and learn. Never mind, little James, I'm going to push behind."
Clouds of smoke and steam towered from the snorting engines. We can do it, puffed James.
We will do it,
puffed Gordon. At last, they reached the top. Beep, beep, thank you, goodbye, whistled James. Poop, poop, answered Gordon. Goodbye. That night, the Fat Controller came to see the engines. Please, sir, said Thomas, can Gordon pull coaches again now?
If you understand that having a good washdown is essential to every engine, then yes, Gordon, you may.
Thank you, grunted Gordon. The other engines settled happily to sleep. Dirty or clean, I'm a famous machine, murmured Gordon, but no one heard but him. One morning, Gordon was in the yard taking on a large supply of coal. That's the third load of coal you've had today, Gordon, said James. Some might say you're being rather greedy. I'm an important engine, replied Gordon. Important engines need plenty of coal, but I doubt if you would understand that, James. James snorted and went about his work. Later, Gordon was taking on water from a standpipe because the water tower was under repair. I wouldn't drink too much of that water if I were you, Gordon. It might give you boiler ache. Pah, said Gordon. What's this? Educating Gordon Day? First James and now you, Duck. Big engines have big needs. Little engines are just annoying. Don't say I didn't warn you, laughed Duck. Later, Gordon steamed into the yard at the big station. That's what I need, exclaimed Gordon. There, emerging out of the sheds, were two shiny tenders. Now, if I had two tenders, said Gordon, I wouldn't need to stop so often and I wouldn't have to listen to silly little engines. Those tenders belong to a visitor, replied his driver. Diesel sidled up alongside. Everyone knows that tenders are a mark of distinction, but I'm afraid that no amount of tenders will save you in the end. We diesels are taking over and we don't need tenders to make us important, not even one. Gordon was most upset. He was feeling just the same the next day. I'm not happy. I know, put in Duck brightly. It's boiler ache. It's not boiler ache, protested Gordon. It's... Of course it is, interrupted Henry. That water's bad. Your boiler must be full of sludge. Have a good washout, then you'll feel a different engine. Don't be vulgar, huffed Gordon. He backed down onto his train, hissing mournfully. Cheer up, Gordon, said the Fat Controller. I can't, sir. Is it true what Diesel says, sir? What does he say? That diesels are taking over. Don't worry, Gordon, that will never happen on my railway. And one more thing, sir. Why did the visitor have two tenders? Because he lives on a railway with long distances between coaling depots. Gordon felt better. But Henry started complaining. He banged some trucks angrily. I always work hard enough for two, he puffed. I deserve another tender. Duck whispered something to Donald. He was going to play a trick on Henry. Henry, he asked innocently, would you like my tenders? Yours? What have you got to do with tenders? All right, said Duck. The deal's off. Would you like them, Donald? I wouldn't deprive you of the honour, replied Donald. It is a great honour, continued Duck thoughtfully, but I'm only a tank engine. Perhaps James might. I'm sorry I was rude, said Henry hastily. How many tenders have you, and when could I have them? I have 6, and you can have them this evening. 6 lovely tenders, chortled Henry. What a splendid sight I'll be. Henry was excited all day. Do you think it'll be all right? He asked for the umpteenth time. Of course, said Duck. They're all ready now. The other engines waited where they could each get a good view.
But Henry wasn't a splendid sight at all. His 6 tenders were very old, dirty and filled with boiler sludge. "Had a good wash out, Henry," called a voice. "That's right, you'll feel a different engine now." Henry was not sure, but he thought the voice belonged to Gordon.
Henry the Green Engine has lived on the island of Sodor for many years. He wouldn't want to be anywhere else. He likes every part of it, from the fields filled with flowers to the white sandy beaches. But there is one place that Henry always enjoyed visiting more than any other. His driver knew this too. "Come on, Henry," he would say. "We've made good time today. We'll stop for a while by the forest." Henry loved it here. The forest was full of broad oaks and tall pines. Henry could remember the day long ago when he and Toby brought some new trees to be planted and Terrence and Trevor helped haul them into place. Now he could see the trees growing amongst the others on the hillside. Henry always felt better for being here. He couldn't really explain why, but his driver understood. "It's peaceful," he said to Henry. But one night, everything changed. The engines were resting in the shed. "Listen," said Thomas. "Can you hear a strange whistling sound?" "It's the wind blowing outside our shed," replied Toby, "but I've never heard it like this before." "Do you know," added James, "if Gordon wasn't here now, I'd say it was him thundering by with the express." All the engines laughed, except Henry. "I hope the wind won't harm the forest." By morning, the fierce winds had gone, but their damage was done. Henry's driver came to see him in the yard. "Trees have fallen on the line. We must help clear the tracks." Donald set off with the breakdown train, and Henry followed. Trees lay everywhere. The hillside now looked so bare. Henry felt sad. What will happen to all the animals who live here, he thought. When Henry's flat trucks were full of logs, he took them to the timber mill, where they would be turned into furniture and other things. Henry was glad the wood was being put to good use, but he was still sorry to lose part of his forest. "Oh dear," sighed Toby. "I wish there was something we could do to make things better again." "Yes, indeed," replied Thomas, "but what? We can't mend broken trees." Toby puffed slowly into the yard. "Hello, Toby," said the Fat Controller. "You do look glum." "I'm sad about the trees," said Toby, "and so is Henry. The forest is a special place to him. Now some of it is gone." "We'll soon put that right. I have an important job for you, Toby. I would like you to take some trucks to the forest." When the trucks arrived, Toby was delighted. They were full of splendid young trees, all ready for planting. "This is the best job I've ever had," said Toby happily. When Henry returned, he was most surprised. There were Trevor and Terrence busily helping the workmen clear the torn stumps and branches. "Look, Henry," called Terrence, "we're beginning again. The hillside will look better than ever before. You'll see." Now Henry can see the trees growing strong and tall, and the animals are coming back. Sometimes everywhere is quiet. At other times, Henry can hear leaves rustling or a bird's wing brushing the air. Often he can hear the sound of children laughing, and always he is happy here.
On a clear day when the sky is blue and there is just enough breeze to blow the clouds away, you can stand on the big hill above the valley and watch Duck and Oliver far below, busily at work on Duck's branch line near the sea. The two engines are very proud of their matching coats of gleaming colour. Oliver often talks about the time that Douglas saved him from scrap. If it wasn't for his help, Oliver will say, I might have been caught when I ran away from the scrapyard, and I would never have come to live here on the Fat Controller's railway. The other engines all wanted to know about Oliver's adventures. Amazing, remarked Henry.
Oliver, said James, has resource.
And sagacity, put in Gordon. What does that mean? Whispered Percy. I think, replied Thomas, it's about being clever and wise. He is, finished Gordon, an example to us all. I'm sorry to say that Oliver became very puffed up in the smoke box. Henry says I'm amazing. He's right. He whistled as he swooshed along the line. One day, the Fat Controller came to see him. You are doing well. Now, you must learn how to look after trucks. Every wise engine knows that you cannot trust trucks. The other engines warned Oliver, but he took no notice. You think I can't manage? He said huffily. Gordon knows better. He says I'm sagacious. You may be good gracious, or whatever you call it, but trucks can be troublesome and... Say no more, Duck, interrupted Donald. It's maybe a pity, but the wee engine'll have to learn for himself. Oliver pulled some loaded trucks to a siding and pushed the empties to the chute. Then he came back to take the loaded trucks away. They were comfortable and didn't want to move. What right has he to poke his funnel in here? They grumbled. We want Duck, or Donald, or Douglas. Look sharp, puffed Oliver. That's not the way to speak, hissed the trucks. We'll pay him out. Oliver heard nothing. The trucks moved smoothly at first, then suddenly Oliver felt them push forward. His driver applied the brakes, but they were useless against the surging trucks. On, yelled the trucks. Oliver fought hard, but still they forced him on and on. At last the trucks grew tired. I'm winning, gasped Oliver. But it was too late. Oliver lay, bruised and bemused, bunkered down in the turntable well. Duck surveyed the damage. Hello, Oliver. Are you being a good gracious engine? Beg pardon, of course, but we really don't like this sort of surprise. Donald and Douglas will miss their turntable until it is mended. That evening, Oliver was hauled gently to safety. I'm sorry, sir, he said to the Fat Controller. I should have listened to Duck's advice. I don't feel good gracious, whatever it is. I just feel silly. Well, Oliver, replied the Fat Controller, now you know the damage trucks can do. Yes, I do, sir, groaned Oliver. I look like a load of scrap iron. Ho, ho. Oh, I don't think so, laughed the Fat Controller. But you do need to go to the works to be mended. The other engines now felt sorry for Oliver. The branch line won't be the same without you, whistled Duck. Come back soon. A few days later, Oliver did come back. His coat gleamed brighter than ever. He was a wiser engine, too, and never made a mistake about trucks again. It was a splendid morning on the island of Sodor. James was feeling very pleased with himself. His red paint gleamed in the sunshine as he sped along the line. He reached the junction just as Percy puffed in with some trucks. James was surprised to see him. What are you doing here, Percy? You should be at the next station by now. You're late.
I know, sighed Percy. These trucks have been troublesome all morning.
That's no excuse, Percy, snorted James. Nothing should stop us. The Fat Controller relies on us to be on time. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll be on my way.
And James puffed importantly away.
Bossy buffers, muttered Percy. James arrived at the harbour. It was market day. The harbour yard was filled with the sweet smell of fruit from faraway lands.
The fruit was delivered in big ships. James watched as strawberries, oranges, melons and bananas were carefully loaded into his trucks.
Then he set off for the station on the main line. On the way, he met Thomas.
Really reliable. That's me, panted James proudly. Pity the same can't be said for Percy. Peep, peep. Goodbye.
What was that about? Gasped Annie and Clarabel. That was trouble. Trouble for James, just wait and see. Percy was back in the yard and busy shunting. He had the trucks in good order and was making up for lost time. But the station master had bad news. What's happened? Asked Percy's driver. James's brakes have jammed. We need Percy's help right away. Percy quickly set off to the rescue. He found James stuck on the line and looking glum. Percy couldn't help laughing. Got yourself in a jam, eh, James? What you might call a sticky situation. Be quiet, said James. It's not funny having jammed brakes, and not very reliable either, teased Percy. I am surprised you let it happen, James. Nothing should stop us engines. That's enough, Percy, said his driver. Can you push these trucks? Of course I can, whistled Percy. There's no time to lose. James has done too much of that already. James angrily hissed steam as Percy was coupled to the trucks. Off we go, said Percy. I'll have to go fast to get there in time. These big engines are so unreliable. Be careful, Percy, called his driver, but Percy was in a hurry. He didn't see that the points had failed and that he had been diverted into a siding. Look out, Percy, shouted his driver and applied the brakes. But it was too late. The driver and the fireman had jumped clear, but squashed fruit squirted all over Percy. The Fat Controller arrived. Percy, you are not to blame for the points failure, but I do not run a jam factory. Yes, sir. No, sir. And Percy squelched sadly away. That night, the shed was silent. James and Percy felt very sorry for themselves. At last, Thomas spoke. You know, he said to no engine in particular, there's more than one way to get jammed. We all learned that today. Still there was silence. What's more, continued Thomas, we also learned that sometimes when engines help each other out of a jam, things can still go wrong. So, said a voice. So, finished Thomas, that means we learned a lot today, and therefore, then came a chorus. We're really useful engines after all. Percy and Duck like working at the harbour by the sea. On a clear summer's night, there is no better place to be. The big ships bring passengers. Cargo ships carry machinery and other things. Duck and Percy puff backwards and forwards with the crates of cargo as they are loaded and unloaded by the quayside. One morning, Duck and Percy noticed that the horizon was packed with sails flapping against the blue sky. I wish I could sail to faraway lands, sighed Duck. Engines can't go sailing, snorted Percy, because engines can't float.
Duck still had his dreams. Suddenly they were rudely interrupted.
Wakey, wakey,
hovered Harold.
I'm looking at the boats,
replied Duck.
That's the regatta,
whirred Harold.
Lots of boats, lots of races, great fun. I hover around in case I'm needed.
Do you go to the horizon? asked Duck.
Yes, and beyond.
I didn't know there was a beyond, whispered Percy. Do you go to other places at sea? continued Duck.
Certainly. I can land on ships, you know, anywhere, anytime. Goodbye.
Duck sighed. He went on talking about the regatta all day. Percy lost patience. Well, Duck, I'd rather have my wheels on solid ground. Our rails can take us to all the places we could ever wish to see. That's an emergency, called Duck's driver. I'll check with the harbour master. He returned with bad news. A man taking part in the regatta has hurt his hand. We're to take him to the hospital at the next station. Harold's bringing him now. Come on.
Good to see you again, Duck,
whirred Harold as he landed carefully on the platform. The man was gently helped to safety.
My job is to stay at sea in case of other emergencies. Otherwise, I would take this gentleman to hospital myself. Must fly. Goodbye.
Duck set off on his journey. Soon he was steaming well and his wheels were thundering along the track. When they reached the station, the man thanked everyone and Bertie got ready to take him to hospital. You look splendid flying along the line, Duck, glowed Bertie. No wonder they call you Great Western. Percy's right, Duck thought to himself. Engines are happiest when their wheels are firmly on the rails. That night, Percy and Duck stayed a little longer at the quay. The air was warm and the sea calm. There's a shooting star, said Duck. Don't be daft, laughed Percy. It's Harold. Look, he's hovering overhead. Something fluttered down towards Duck. His driver caught it. It's a flag from the regatta. Harold's giving it to you as a present, Duck. That was kind of Harold, whispered Duck. He may have whirly arms instead of wheels, but he seems to understand just what an engine needs. Duck still wonders about the lands beyond the horizon, but he enjoys being with friends most of all, and I think he knows that sometimes the best travels are those we can only dream about. Don't you? Every afternoon, Thomas the Tank Engine puffs along his branch line with Annie and Clarabel. First, they pass the watermill. Next, they come to a big farm. Then, they can see a bridge with a village nestled either side of it. This is a special place. Whenever children hear Thomas coming along, they stand on the bridge waving until he is out of sight. One day, Thomas was running late. He had stopped at the signal before the bridge to talk to some new children. Percy was waiting too. "Hurry up, Thomas," called Percy when the signal dropped. "If you're late, the fat controller may get a new engine to replace you." He would never do that, thought Thomas, but he was worried. Next day, Thomas hurried along the line. Just ahead was a goods yard. There, on the platform, was an inspector waving a red flag. Next, Thomas saw some children. They were waving too. Something must be wrong, thought Thomas. This station is for goods, not passengers. "Help, Thomas, help! We are glad to see you,"
called the children. "Please, will you take us home?" The station master explained to Thomas's driver that the school bus had broken down and that all the parents would be worried if the children were late. Thomas waited as the children walked down from the bridge. Then he took them to the next station, where Bertie was waiting to take them home. When Thomas finished his journey, he was very late. He was worried that the fat controller might be cross with him. "I warned Thomas," puffed Percy to James. "He's been late one time too many. He'll be in trouble now." But next morning, the fat controller was nowhere to be seen. "Thank goodness," sighed Thomas. Thomas knows every part of his branch line, but just ahead was a stretch where the hot sun had bent the rails on the track. "Careful, Thomas," called his driver, but it was too late. "That's done it," said his driver. "We shan't get any further today." "But what about my passengers?" "Don't worry. They'll be looked after," replied his driver. While workmen repaired the line, Thomas had to shunt trucks in the yard. Bertie came to see him. "I understand you need my help again." "Yes, Bertie," replied Thomas sadly. "I can't run without my rails." Bertie set off to collect Thomas's passengers. "Hello, Bertie," they said. "We are glad you are here." Bertie drove along the road by the railway. He stopped at each station along the line. Sometimes he stopped between stations to let people off closer to their homes. Thomas felt miserable. "I've lost my passengers. They like Bertie better than me." The fat controller arrived. "Your branch line is repaired. I'm going to change your timetable so that you and Bertie can work together more." When Thomas reached the station, there were all his passengers. "Bertie is a very good bus, but we missed our train rides with you," they said. Later, Thomas spoke to Bertie. "Thank you for looking after my passengers." "Oh, that's all right, Thomas. I like to make new friends, but I'm glad to share them with you." "Bertie," said Thomas, "you're a very good friend indeed." Bill and Ben are the most mischievous engines working on the Fat Controller's railway. They are kept busy pushing and pulling trucks up and down the line that runs from the China Clay Works to the harbour yard. They like to have fun together and often play tricks on the workmen. But sometimes their teasing ways can get them into trouble. One morning, the Fat Controller came to see them.
Important goods have arrived in the big yard, Bill and Ben. I need you to help the other engines.
"Oh, yes, sir, of course," replied the twins. They set off happily on their important mission. Boko was resting in the yard when suddenly he heard a pair of familiar whistles. Sighed Boko. "Here comes trouble." "The Fat Controller told us you were tired," teased Bill. "He asked us to take all your trucks for you." "You two never stop, do you?" chuckled Boko. "But I'm wise to your pranks, and we do need your help here." The twins were soon busy pushing and pulling the heavy trucks into place. At last the day's work was done. The twins now became excited. They were going to use the turntable for the first time. Bill went first. "This is fun," he shrieked to Ben. He didn't want to move off at all.
the foreman stopped the turntable. "Please make way for the other engines," he ordered. Bill did so, but unfortunately the foreman had accidentally stopped the turntable in the wrong place. Bill was on the wrong track, and there was Ben puffing directly toward him. The engine came to a grinding halt. They gazed grimly at each other. "I was here first," said Bill. "But you're in my way," protested Ben. "You'll have to back up again." "I won't." "You will." "I won't." The fat controller came to stop the noise.
If you don't behave, I shall not allow you here again.
The next day, Ben was still grumpy. "That Bill, imagine getting in my way on the turntable. He's a really silly engine." "The way I heard it," sighed Boko, "it sounded like you were both to blame." "Pho, you must have heard it all wrong." The twins grumbled about each other all day. Even kind Edward lost patience. "All this grumbling spreads bad atmosphere in the yard." "You're quite right, and that's why I've come up with a plan." Boko whispered his plan to Edward. Then his driver told the fat controller.
I'll start making arrangements straight away.
The next morning he called Bill and Ben into the yard.
Boko is taking a special train to the harbour. His regular heavy goods train is waiting on the siding. You can pull it together.
But, protested Bill and Ben, who were still not speaking to each other.
Good. I knew I could rely on you two.
"I'll take the train myself," huffed Ben. "Go right ahead," said Bill. Ben was coupled up to the train of trucks, but they were too heavy for him to move alone. "Go on," teased Bill. "I can't," said Ben. Then suddenly both twins laughed. "I don't think we'll take turns this time, Ben," said Bill. "I think we'd better pull together." Ben was delighted. It was good to be helping each other. Best of all, it was good to be friends again. It was a special holiday on the island of Sodor. Bertie the bus was working harder than ever before. All the engines were busy too. Duck was waiting for his next journey. Near him stood a red bus, but he didn't look friendly like Bertie. The bus growled as he gazed at the happy passengers.
Stupid nonsense, he grumbled. I wouldn't have brought them if I'd known. I'd have had a breakdown or something.
"I'm glad you didn't," smiled Duck. "You'd have spoiled their fun."
Ah, enjoyment is all you engines live for. One day railways will be ripped up.
Duck felt shocked at such an idea. "We have a friend called Bertie, and he's a bus, but he likes the railway. Sometimes he teases us about it, but he'd never want to see it ripped up."
Huh, growled the bus. I know Bertie. He's too small in size to be of any use.
Duck took no notice. "That bus is silly," he thought as he steamed away. At the junction, Duck told Oliver all about him. "I call him Bulgy," chuckled Oliver. Then he puffed happily away. But that afternoon, when the two engines met again, Oliver was no longer laughing. "Bulgy's friend has come," he said. "He's rude too. He's taking Bulgy's passengers home so as to leave Bulgy free to steal ours." "But he can't," objected Doug. "Bulgy says he can get them to the big station before us." "Rubbish," replied Doug. "It's much further by road." "Yes," continued Oliver, "but Bulgy says he knows a shortcut." That evening, the engines were preparing for the homeward rush. "Where are the passengers?" they wondered. "Look!" shrilled Oliver. "Look at Bulgy!"
He's a mean scarlet deceiver. Bulgy was wearing a large sign saying railway bus. Yaboo snubs, he jeered as he roared away. Come on, puffed Duck to his coaches. Let's see what he's up to. Duck wanted to pay Bulgy out, but he wasn't sure how. Then, in the distance, Duck saw a man waving a red flag. That meant danger. The line here crosses a narrow road, and there was Bulgy, wedged firmly under the bridge. So this was his shortcut, chuckled Duck. He tricked us, shouted Bulgy's passengers. He said he was a railway bus, but he wouldn't accept our return tickets. He wanted us to think railways are no good. Duck's crew examined the bridge. It's risky, but we must help the passengers. Passengers are urgent, agreed Duck. Duck slowly and carefully set off across the bridge. Bulgy wailed as he felt the bridge quiver. Stop! He shouted. It might fall on me. That would serve you right for telling lies, said Duck. But the bridge didn't collapse. Duck made good time, and all the passengers caught their trains. The bridge is now mended, but not, unfortunately, Bulgy and his ways. He never learned sense. He's a hen house now, and his lies can do no harm. The hens never listen to them anyway.
Thomas and Percy are good friends, but sometimes Percy teases Thomas about being frightened, and he doesn't like that at all. One evening he was dozing happily in the shed, but Percy wanted to talk. Wake up, Thomas. Are you dreaming about the time you thought I was a ghost? Certainly not. Anyway, I was only pretending to be scared. I knew it was you, really. Percy went on teasing him. I hope the guard leaves the light on for you tonight. Why? Asked Thomas. I quite like the dark. Oh, really? Exclaimed Percy. I am surprised. I'd always thought you were afraid of the dark. I wonder why. Thomas decided to say nothing and went to sleep instead. Next day, the fat controller arrived. I would like you to go to the harbour tonight to collect something rather unusual. What sort of something? Wait and see. Percy was moving trucks into a siding. Henry arrived with his goods train. The signalman switched the points, and Percy waited on the siding until Henry had steamed by. Then there was trouble. The points are jammed, called the signalman. I can't switch them back. The workmen will mend them in the morning. It's too late now. Said Percy's driver. I'm sorry, Percy, but you will have to stay here for the night. Where are you going? Asked Percy. Home for tea, replied the fireman. Percy was speechless. He watched as the other engines went home to the shed. Night time came, and Percy began to feel very lonely. Oh dear, he murmured. It's very dark. Oh, what's that? It was only an owl, but Percy didn't realise this. I wish Thomas was here too, he sighed. Thomas was waiting for his mysterious load at the harbour. Suddenly, there it was. Cinders and ashes, cried Thomas. It's a dragon. Don't worry, laughed his driver. This dragon is made of paper. It's for the carnival tomorrow. Workmen lifted the dragon onto Thomas's low loader and put lights all around it for protection. Then Thomas set off into the misty night. Percy was asleep in his sidings and had no idea that Thomas was approaching him.
cried Percy. "I'm not going to open my eyes until my driver comes." Next morning, the points were mended and Percy puffed back to the junction. Gordon was just about to leave with the express. "You'll never guess what I saw last night." Gordon was in no mood for puzzles. "I'm a busy engine. I don't have time for your games." "I've seen a huge dragon. It was covered in lights." Gordon snorted. "You've been in the sun too long. Your dome has cracked." When the other engines heard the news, they laughed too. "Look out, Percy," chuckled James, "or the dragon may gobble you up." "No one believes me," puffed Percy. "Maybe I did imagine the dragon after all." But Percy soon found out that he hadn't. "Help! Save me!" cried Percy. "It's all right," whistled Thomas, and he explained about the carnival. "By the way, how was your night out?" Percy decided to tell Thomas the truth. "Well, Percy," said Thomas, "maybe we do get scared sometimes, but if we're not afraid to tell each other, then that means we're quite brave too." At night, when the other engines are tucked away in their sheds, you can still hear the faraway call of an engine's whistle and the clickety-clack of train wheels turning. This is the sound of the post train. One train is pulled by Thomas and the other by Percy, as the loads are too heavy for one engine to do the work alone. The post is loaded into trucks at both the harbours and the engines pull their trains through the silent stations, delivering their precious loads. On a clear night, a big shiny moon brightens their journey, but often Thomas and Percy can't even see the stars. But whatever the weather, lamps along the track always light their way. One night, Percy was waiting at the junction. The main line train was late. At last, Henry arrived. "Sorry," he puffed. "The mail boat from the mainland was delayed." "Come on, Percy," said his driver. "Let's make up for lost time." Percy puffed along as quickly as he could, but the sun was already rising as he finished his work. "Never mind," thought Percy. "It's nice to be up and about when it's the start of a new day and there's no one else around." Percy was not alone for long. "Bother," said Percy. "It's that dizzy thing, Harold." "Good morning," whirred Harold. "I always said railways were out of date, but you're so slow with the post, you should give everyone their stamps back. Post haste." Percy was too tired to explain. "Bird brain," he muttered. "Good morning, Percy," called Duck. "You're up early." "No, you're wrong," sighed Percy. "I'm back, tired and late." He rolled into the shed and fell asleep almost before his buffers touched the bar. His driver decided to set off early that evening. Thomas was waiting at the station. "Thank goodness I've a chance to speak to you. Driver said that the person in charge of the post has complained to the Fat Controller about the delay last night." "But that wasn't my fault," replied Percy. "I know," said Thomas, "and so does the Fat Controller, but this post person wouldn't listen. Tonight we'll just have to be quicker than ever before." The engines were just leaving the station when they heard a familiar buzzing. "I say, you two, there's news flying about." "Where?" puffed Percy. "All over the place. They're going to scrap the post train and use me instead. Wings work wonders, you know, always." "Rubbish," huffed Thomas. That night, everything ran like clockwork. Thomas and Percy steamed through the stations, making good time everywhere they went. At a station,
Thomas noticed a man looking cold and worried. He had missed his train home. "We can give you a ride," said Thomas's driver, "but it will be rather uncomfortable." "Thank you," said the man. "Anything's better than sitting here." The next afternoon, Percy passed the airfield and saw Harold. "Hello, lazy wings. Are you too tired to fly today?"
The wind's too strong. I've been grounded,
grumbled Harold. "You need rails," laughed Percy. "They work wonders, you know. Always." That night, the fat controller showed the two engines a letter. It was from the man who had missed his train.
"He thinks you are both splendid,"
said the fat controller,
"and everyone says that the post train is the pride of the line."
Every summer, the island of Sodor is very busy. Holidaymakers love to sightsee, and when the weather is fine, there is no better place to visit. Some people like to go to the mountains, others like the valleys. Children love the seaside. One morning, Thomas was puffing along the line that runs by the coast. His two coaches, Annie and Clarabelle, were packed with children going to the beach. Everyone was happy. Percy was taking some trucks to the harbour. "Hello, Thomas. You look cheerful. I wish I could take children today instead of trucks." "They're the Vicar's Sunday School," explained Thomas. "I'm busy this evening, but the station master says I can ask you to take the children home." "Of course I will," promised Percy. Later, Percy saw Harold. "Sorry, Percy, can't talk. I'm on high alert." "Why?" "Bad weather's due. My help's always needed. Mind how you go, Percy." "Ah," huffed Percy. "As long as I've got rails to run on, I can go anywhere in any weather anyhow. Goodbye." He set off for the beach. It was a beautiful day, but Edward was worried. "Be careful," he warned. "There's a storm coming." "A promise is a promise," thought Percy, "no matter what the weather." The children had a lovely day, but by tea time, dark clouds loomed ahead. Annie and Clarabelle were glad when Percy arrived. He was just in time. Rain streamed down Percy's boiler. Oh, he shivered and thought of his nice dry shed. Percy struggled on past coastal villages and into the countryside. The river was rising fast. I wish I could see, complained Percy, as he battled against the rain. More trouble lay ahead. "Oh," hissed Percy, "the water is sloshing my fire." Percy's driver and fireman had to find some more firewood. "I'll have some of your floorboards, please," said the fireman to the guard. "I only swept the floor this morning," grumbled the guard, but he still helped. Soon, Percy's fire was burning well. He felt warm and comfortable again. Then, he saw Harold. "Oh dear," thought Percy. "Harold's come to laugh at me." Something thudded onto Percy's boiler. "Ow!" exclaimed Percy. "He needn't throw things." "It's a parachute," laughed his driver. "Harold's dropping hot drinks for us." "Thank you, Harold," whistled Percy. "Good to be of service," replied Harold, and he buzzed away. The water lapped Percy's wheels. Percy was losing steam again, but he plunged bravely on. "I promised," he panted. "I promised." He made one more big effort, and at last, exhausted but triumphant, he brought the train home. "Well done, Percy," cheered Thomas. "You kept your promise despite everything." the fat controller arrived in Harold. First he thanked the men, then Percy.
Harold told me you were a wizard. He says he can beat you at some things, but not at being a submarine. I don't know what you two get up to sometimes, but I do know that you're a really useful engine.
Oh, sir, whispered Percy happily.
Mavis is a diesel engine who works for the quarry company, shunting trucks and their sidings. She has 6 small wheels hidden by side plates just like Toby's. Mavis is young and full of her own ideas. She loves rearranging things too, and began putting Toby's trucks in different places every day. This made Toby cross. "Trucks," he grumbled, "should be where you want them, when you want them." "Fiddlesticks," said Mavis, and flounced away. At last, Toby lost patience. "I can't waste time playing hunt the trucks with you. Take them yourself." Mavis was pleased. Taking trucks made her feel important. At the station, Diesel oiled up to her. "Toby's an old fusspot," she complained. Diesel sensed trouble and was delighted. "Toby says only steam engines can manage trucks," continued Mavis. "How absurd. Depend upon it, Mavis. Anything steam engines can do, we diesels can do better." Diesel knew nothing about trucks, but Mavis didn't realise this. Toby's line crosses with the main road behind the station and for a short way follows a farm lane. Frosty weather makes the muddy lane rock hard and very slippery. Toby stops before reaching the lane. His fireman halts the traffic at the crossing and then he sets off again. By using the heavy trucks to push him along, he has no trouble with the frosty rails in the lane. It is the only safe thing to do in this kind of weather. Toby warned Mavis and told her just what to do. "I can manage, thank you," she replied. "I'm not an old fusspot like you." The trucks were tired of being pushed around by Mavis. "It's slippery," they whispered. "Let's push her around instead." "On, on," they yelled. Mavis took no notice. Instead, she brought the trucks carefully down the lane and stopped at the level crossing. All traffic halted. "One in the headlamp for Fusspot Toby," chortled Mavis. But Mavis had stopped in the wrong place. Instead of taking Toby's advice, she had given the trucks the chance they wanted. Hold back, they cried. "Grrr, up," ordered Mavis. The trucks just laughed and her wheels spun helplessly. Workmen sanded the rails and tried to dig away the frozen mud, but it was no good. Everyone was impatient. "Grrr, ah," wailed Mavis. Toby was in the yard when he heard the news. "I warned her," he fumed. "She's young yet," soothed his driver, "and she can manage her trucks herself," interrupted Toby. "They're your trucks, really," his driver replied. "Mavis is supposed to stay at the quarry if the fat controller finds out." Yes," said Toby thoughtfully. He and his driver agreed that it would be best to help Mavis after all. An angry farmer was telling Mavis just what she could do with her train. "Having trouble, Mavis?" chortled Toby. "I am surprised." "Gosh," said Mavis. With much puffing and wheel slip, Toby pushed Mavis and the trucks back. The hard work made his fire burn fiercely, and his firemen spread hot cinders to melt the frozen mud. At last they had finished. "Goodbye," called Toby. "You'll manage now, I expect." Mavis didn't answer. She took the trucks to the sheds and scuttled home to the quarry as quickly as she could.
Thomas is a tank engine who lives at a big station on the island of Sodor. He's a cheeky little engine with 6 small wheels, a short stumpy funnel, a short stumpy boiler, and a short stumpy dome. He's a fussy little engine too, always pulling coaches about ready for the big engines to take on long journeys. And when trains come in, he pulls the empty coaches away so that the big engines can go and rest. Thomas thinks no engine works as hard as he does. He loves playing tricks on them, including Gordon, the biggest and proudest engine of all. Thomas likes whistling rudely at him. "Wake up, lazy bones, why don't you work hard like me?" One day after pulling the big express, Gordon had arrived back at the sidings very tired. He was just going to sleep when Thomas came up in his cheeky way. "Wake up, lazy bones, do some hard work for a change. You can't catch me." And off he ran laughing. Instead of going to sleep again, Gordon thought how he could get back at Thomas. One morning, Thomas wouldn't wake up. His driver and fireman couldn't make him start. His fire went out and there was not enough steam. It was nearly time for the express. People were waiting, but the coaches weren't ready. At last, Thomas started. "Oh dear," he yawned. He fussed into the station where Gordon was waiting. "Hurry up, you," said Gordon. "Hurry yourself," replied Thomas. Gordon began making his plan. "Yes," said Gordon, "I will." And almost before the coaches had stopped moving, Gordon reversed quickly and was coupled to the train. "Get in quickly, please," he whistled. Thomas usually pushed behind the big trains to help them start, but he was always uncoupled first. This time Gordon started so quickly they forgot to uncouple Thomas. Gordon's chance had come. Come on, puffed Gordon to the coaches. The train went faster and faster, too fast for Thomas. He wanted to stop, but he couldn't. "Peep, peep, stop, stop!" "Hurry, hurry, hurry," laughed Gordon. You can't get away, laughed the coaches. Poor Thomas was going faster than he had ever gone before. He was out of breath and his wheels hurt him, but he had to go on. "I shall never be the same again," he thought sadly. "My wheels will be quite worn out." At last they stopped at a station. Thomas was uncoupled, and he felt very silly and exhausted. Next, he went on to a turntable, thinking of everyone laughing at him. And then he ran onto a siding out of the way. "Well, little Thomas," chuckled Gordon, "now you know what hard work means, don't you?" Poor Thomas couldn't answer. He had no breath. He just puffed slowly away to rest and had a long, long drink. He went home very slowly and was careful afterwards never to be cheeky to Gordon again. One day, Edward was in the shed where he lived with the other engines. They were all bigger than Edward and boasted about it. "The driver won't choose you again," said Gordon. "He wants strong engines like us." But the driver and fireman felt sorry for Edward. "Would you like to come out today?" "Oh, yes, please," said Edward. So they lit his fire, made lots of steam, and Edward puffed away. The other engines were very cross at being left behind. Edward worked hard all day. The coaches thought he was very kind, and the driver was very pleased. I'm going out again tomorrow, Edward told the other engines that night. What do you think of that? But he didn't hear what they thought, for he was so tired and happy that he fell asleep at once. Next morning, Edward woke up to find nothing had changed. Gordon was still boasting. You watch me, little Edward, as I rush through with the express. That will be a splendid sight for you. Goodbye, little Edward. Look out for me this afternoon. Edward went off to do some shunting. Edward liked shunting. It was fun playing with trucks. He would come up quietly and give them a push. Then he would stop and the silly trucks would go bump into each other. "Oh!" they cried. "Whatever is happening?" Edward played till there were no more trucks. Then he stopped to rest. Presently he heard a whistle. Gordon was very cross. Instead of nice shining coaches, he was pulling a lot of very dirty trucks. "A goods train, a goods train, a goods train," he grumbled. "The shame of it, the shame of it, oh, the shame of it." Edward laughed and went to find some more trucks. Then there was trouble. "Gordon can't get up the hill," the porter called to Edward's driver. "Will you take Edward and push him, please?" They found Gordon halfway up and very cross. His driver and fireman were talking to him severely. "You're not trying." "I can't do it," said Gordon. "The noisy trucks hold an engine back so." Edward's driver came up. "We've come to push." "No use at all," said Gordon. "You wait and see," replied Edward's driver. They brought the train back to the bottom of the hill. "I'm ready," said Edward. "No good," grumbled Gordon. They pulled and pushed as hard as they could. "I can't do it, I can't do it, I can't do it," puffed Gordon. "I will do it, I will do it, I will do it," puffed Edward. Edward pushed and puffed and puffed and pushed as hard as ever he could. And almost before he realized it, Gordon found himself at the top of the hill. "I've done it, I've done it, I've done it," he said proudly. He forgot all about Edward and didn't wait to say thank you. Edward was left out of breath and far behind. He ran on to the next station, and there he found that the driver and fireman were very pleased with him. The fireman gave him a nice long drink, and the driver said, "I'll get out my paint tomorrow and give you a beautiful coat of blue with red stripes. Then you will be the smartest engine in the shed." Once, an engine attached to a train was afraid of a few drops of rain. It went into a tunnel and squeaked through its funnel and wouldn't come out again. The engine's name is Henry. His driver and fireman argued with him, but he would not move. "The rain will spoil my lovely green paint and red stripes," he said. The guard blew his whistle till he had no more breath and waved his flag till his arms ached, but Henry still stayed in the tunnel and blew steam at him. "I'm not going to spoil my lovely green paint and red stripes for you." Then along came Sir Topham Hatt, the man in charge of all the engines on Sodor. They call him the Fat Controller. "We will pull you out," said the Fat Controller. but Henry only blew steam at him. Everyone pulled except the Fat Controller, because, he said, my doctor has forbidden me to pull. But still Henry stayed in the tunnel. Then they tried pushing from the other end. The Fat Controller said, 1, 2, 3, push! But he didn't help. My doctor has forbidden me to push, he said. They pushed and pushed and pushed, but still Henry stayed in the tunnel. At last Thomas came along. The guard waved his red flag and stopped him. Everyone argued with Henry. Look, it has stopped raining, they said. Yes, but it will begin again soon, said Henry, and what would become of my green paint with red stripes then? Thomas pushed and puffed and pushed as hard as ever he could. But still Henry stayed in the tunnel. Eventually, even the Fat Controller gave up. We shall take away your rails, he said, and leave you here for always and always and always. They took up the old rails and built a wall in front of him so that Henry couldn't get out of the tunnel anymore. All he could do was watch the trains rushing through the other tunnel. He was very sad because he thought no one would ever see his lovely green paint with red stripes again. As time went on, Edward and Gordon would often pass by. Edward would say, "Peep, peep, hello." And Gordon would say, "Poop, poop, poop, serves you right." Poor Henry had no steam to answer. His fire had gone out. Sudden dirt from the tunnel had spoilt his lovely green paint and red stripes anyway. He wondered if he would ever be allowed to pull trains again. But I think he deserved his punishment. Don't you? Gordon always pulled the big express. He was proud of being the only engine strong enough to do so. It was full of important people, like the Fat Controller, and Gordon was seeing how fast he could go. "Hurry, hurry, hurry," he said. "Trickety-tock, trickety-tock, trickety-tock," said the coaches. In a minute, Gordon would see the tunnel, where Henry stood bricked up and lonely. Oh dear, thought Henry, why did I worry about rain spoiling my lovely coat of paint? Will the Fat Controller ever forgive me and let me out again? "I'm going to poop at Henry," said Gordon. He was almost there when... And there was Gordon going slower and slower in a cloud of steam. His driver stopped the train. "What has happened to me?" asked Gordon. "I feel so weak." "You've burst your safety valve," said the driver. "You can't pull the train anymore." "Oh dear," said Gordon. "We were going so nicely too. And look, there's Henry laughing at me." Everyone came to see Gordon. "Huh," said the Fat Controller. "I never liked these big engines. Always going wrong. Send for another engine at once." While the guard went to find one, they uncoupled Gordon, who had enough puff to slink onto the siding out of the way. Edward was the only engine left. "I'll come and try," he said. "Huh," said Gordon. "That's no use. Edward can't push the train." Edward puffed and pushed and pushed and puffed, but he couldn't move the heavy coaches. "I told you so," said Gordon. "Why not let Henry try?" "Yes," said the Fat Controller, "I will." "Will you help pull this train, Henry?" he asked. "Oh, yes," said Henry. When Henry had got up steam, he puffed out. He was dirty and covered with cobwebs. "Oh, I am stiff, he groaned. "Have a run to ease your joints and find a turntable," said the Fat Controller. When Henry came back, he felt much better. Then they coupled him up. "Peep, peep," said Edward, "I'm ready." "Peep, peep, peep," said Henry, "so am I." "Pull hard, we'll do it. Pull hard, we'll do it." They puffed together. "We've done it together, we've done it together," said Edward and Henry. "You've done it, hooray! You've done it, hooray!" sang the coaches. Everyone was excited. The Fat Controller leaned out of the window to wave at Edward and Henry. But the train was going so fast that his hat blew off into a field where a goat ate it for tea. They never stopped till they came to the station at the end of the line. The passengers all said thank you, and the Fat Controller promised Henry a new coat of paint. On their way home, Edward and Henry helped Gordon back to the shed. All three engines are now great friends. Henry doesn't mind the rain now. He knows that the best way to keep his paint nice is not to run into tunnels, but to ask his driver to rub him down when the day's work is over. Thomas the tank engine was grumbling to the other engines. "I spend my time pulling coaches about ready for you to take out on journeys." The other engines laughed. "Why can't I pull passenger trains too?" "You're too impatient," they said. "You'd be sure to leave something behind." "Rubbish," said Thomas. "I'll show you." One night, he and Henry were alone. Henry was ill. The men worked hard, but he didn't get better. He felt just as bad next morning. Henry usually pulled the first train, and Thomas had to get his coaches ready. If Henry is ill, he thought, perhaps I shall pull his train. Thomas ran to find the coaches. Come along, he fussed. There's plenty of time, they grumbled. Thomas took them to the platform and wanted to run round in front at once. But his driver wouldn't let him. Don't be impatient, Thomas. Thomas waited and waited. The people got in. The guard and station master walked up and down. The porter banged the doors, and still Henry didn't come. Thomas got more and more excited. The Fat Controller came to see what was the matter, and the guard and the station master told him about Henry. Find another engine, he ordered. There's only Thomas, they said. You'll have to do it then, Thomas. Be quick now. So Thomas ran round to the front and back down on the coaches ready to start. Don't be impatient, said his driver. Wait till everything is ready. But Thomas was too excited to listen. What happened then, no one knows. Perhaps they forgot to couple Thomas to the train, or perhaps the driver pulled the lever by mistake. Anyhow, Thomas started. As he passed the first signal box, men waved and shouted, but he didn't stop. They're waving because I'm such a splendid engine, he thought importantly. Everybody says it's hard to pull trains, but I think it's easy. Hurry, 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 he puffed, pretending to be like Gordon. People have never seen me pulling a train before. It's nice of them to wave, and he whistled. Peep, peep, thank you. Then he came to a signal at danger. Bother, he thought. I must stop, and I was going so nicely too. What a nuisance signals are. He blew an angry peep, peep on his whistle. The signalman ran up. Hello, Thomas, he said. What are you doing here? I'm pulling a train, said Thomas. Can't you see? Where are your coaches, then? Thomas looked back. Why, bless me, he said, if we haven't left them behind. Yes, said the signalman. You'd better go back quickly and fetch them. Poor Thomas was so sad he nearly cried. Cheer up, said his driver. Let's go back quickly and try again. The station, all the passengers were talking at once. They were telling the Fat Controller what a bad railway it was. But when Thomas came back, they saw how sad he was and couldn't be cross. He was coupled to the train, and this time he really pulled it. But for a long time afterwards, the other engines laughed at Thomas and said, Look, there's Thomas, who wanted to pull a train but forgot about the coaches. Thomas the Tank Engine wouldn't stop being a nuisance. Night after night he kept the other engines awake. I'm tired of pushing coaches. I want to see the world. The other engines didn't take much notice, for Thomas was a little engine with a long tongue. But one night, Edward came to the shed. He was a kind little engine and felt sorry for Thomas. I've got some trucks to take home tomorrow. If you take them instead of me, I'll push coaches in the yard. Thank you, said Thomas. That will be nice. Next morning, Edward and Thomas asked their drivers, and when they said yes, Thomas ran off happily to find trucks. Now, trucks are silly and noisy. They talk a lot and don't attend to what they are doing. And I'm sorry to say they play tricks on an engine who is not used to them. Edward knew all about trucks. He warned Thomas to be careful, but Thomas was too excited to listen. The shunter fastened the coupling, and when the signal dropped, Thomas was ready. The guard blew his whistle. Peep, peep, answered Thomas, and started off. But the trucks weren't ready. Oh, they screamed, wait, Thomas, wait. But Thomas wouldn't wait. Come on, he puffed. All right, don't fuss. All right, don't fuss, grumbled the trucks. Thomas began going faster and faster. Whee! He whistled as he rushed through Henry's tunnel. Hurry, hurry, called Thomas. He was feeling very proud of himself, but the trucks grew crosser and crosser. At last, Thomas slowed down as he came to Gordon's Hill. Steady now, steady, warned the driver as they reached the top. He began to put on the brakes. We're stopping, called Thomas. No, 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 answered the trucks, bumping into each other. Go on, go on. Before the driver could stop them, they had pushed Thomas down the hill and were rattling and laughing behind him. Poor Thomas tried hard to stop them from making him go too fast. Stop pushing, he hissed, but the trucks took no notice. Go on, they giggled in their silly way. There's the station. Oh dear, what shall I do? He cried. He rattled straight through and swerved into the goods yard. Thomas shut his eyes. I must stop. When he opened his eyes, he saw he had stopped just in front of the buffers. There watching him was the fat controller. What are you doing here, Thomas? He asked. I brought Edward's trucks, Thomas answered. Why did you come so fast? I didn't mean to. I was pushed, said Thomas. You've got a lot to learn about trucks then, little Thomas. After pushing them about here for a few weeks, you'll know almost as much about them as Edward. Then you'll be a really useful engine. Every day, the fat controller came to the station to catch his train. Hello, he always said to Thomas. Remember, don't be impatient, Thomas. You can never be as strong and fast as Gordon, but you can be a really useful engine. Don't let the silly trucks tease you. There were lots of trucks, and Thomas worked very hard pushing and pulling them into place. There was also a small coach and two strange things his driver called cranes. That's the breakdown train, he told Thomas. The cranes are for lifting heavy things like engines and coaches and trucks. One day, Thomas was in the yard. Suddenly, he heard an engine whistling. Help! Help! A goods train came rushing through much too fast. The engine was James, and he was frightened. His brake blocks were on fire. They're pushing me, he panted. On, laughed the trucks. Still whistling, help, help! Poor James disappeared. I'd like to teach those trucks a lesson, said Thomas the tank engine. Soon came the alarm. James is off the line. The breakdown train, quickly! Thomas was coupled on, and off they went. Thomas worked his hardest. Hurry, 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 he puffed. He wasn't pretending to be like Gordon. He really meant it. Bother those trucks and their tricks. I hope poor James isn't hurt. James's driver and fireman were feeling him all over to see if he was hurt. Never mind, James, they said. It wasn't your fault. It was those wooden brakes they gave you. We always said they were no good. Thomas pushed the breakdown train alongside. Then he pulled the unhurt trucks out of the way. Oh dear, they groaned. Serves you right, puffed Thomas. He was hard at work, puffing backwards and forwards all afternoon. This'll teach you a lesson, he told the trucks. And they answered, yes it will. They left the broken trucks, then with two cranes they put James back on the rails. He tried to move, but he couldn't, so Thomas helped him back to the shed. Fat Controller was waiting anxiously for them. "Well, Thomas," he said, "I've heard all about it and I'm very pleased with you. You're a really useful engine. James shall have some proper brakes and a new coat of paint, and you shall have a branch line all to yourself." "Oh, thank you, sir," said Thomas. Now Thomas is as happy as can be. He has a branch line and 2 coaches called Annie and Clarabel. He puffs proudly backwards and forwards with them all day. He is never lonely. Edward and Henry stop quite often and tell him the news. Gordon is always in a hurry, but never forgets to say poop poop, and Thomas always whistles peep peep in return. James was enjoying his life on the island of Sodor, but he still had a lot to learn. "You're a special mixed traffic engine," said the Fat Controller. "You can pull coaches or trucks quite easily, but you must learn by your mistakes." James knew what the Fat Controller meant. He could well remember that dreadful accident on his first day. "Be careful with the coaches, James," said Edward. "They don't like being bumped." Everyone came to admire James. "I'm a really splendid engine," he thought, and suddenly let off steam. A shower of water fell on the Fat Controller's nice new top hat. Just then the guard blew his whistle, and James thought they had better go. Go on," he puffed to Edward. Don't push," replied Edward. The coaches were grumbling too. Don't go so fast! But James didn't listen. When at last they stopped at the next station, 2 coaches were beyond the platform. They had to go back to let the passengers out. But no one seemed to know about the Fat Controller's top hat, though James felt happier. Presently they came to the station where Thomas was waiting with his 2 coaches. "Hello, James," said Thomas. "Feeling better?" "That's right." "Oh, that's my guard's whistle. I must go. I don't know what the Fat Controller would do without me to run this branch line," and he puffed off importantly. Edward and James passed the field where James had had his accident. The fence was mended and the cows were back again. They ended their journey and rested before setting off for home. James was still wondering what the Fat Controller would have to say about his top hat. Next morning, the Fat Controller spoke severely to him. "If you can't behave, I shall take away your red coat and have you painted blue." James didn't like that at all. He was very rough with the grumbling coaches as he brought them to the platform. "Don't talk, come on," he called to them. "Gordon never has to fetch his own coaches," he thought to himself, "and he's only painted blue." To make James even more cross, this time no one came near him. "I'll show them," he thought. "They think Gordon is the only engine who can pull coaches." Hurry, puffed James. You're going too fast, replied the coaches. James laughed and tried to go faster, but the coaches wouldn't let him. "We're going to stop," they said. "We're going to stop." "What's the matter?" James asked his driver. "The brakes are hard on. Leak in the pipe, most likely. You've banged the coaches enough to make a leak in anything." "How shall we mend it?" said the guard. "We'll do it with newspaper and a leather bootlace," replied the driver. "Well, where is the bootlace coming from?" asked the guard. "Ask the passengers," said the driver. "You have a leather bootlace there, I see, sir," said the guard to a smartly dressed man. "Please give it to me." "I won't," said the man. "Then," said the guard, "I'm afraid the train will just stop where it is." The passengers all said what a bad railway it was. Then they told the man how bad he was instead. Everyone was very cross. At last he handed his laces over. The driver tied a pad of newspaper tightly round the hole in the brake pipe, and James was able to pull the train. But he was a sadder and wiser James, and took care never to bump coaches again. James had not seen the Fat Controller for several days. He was left alone for being naughty, and was not even allowed out to push coaches and trucks in the yard. Oh dear, he thought, I shall have to stay in the shed for always, and no one will see my red coat again. All because I went so fast I made a hole in one of my coaches that had to be mended with, of all things, a passenger's bootlace. At last the Fat Controller arrived. I see you are sorry, James, he said. I hope now that you will be a better engine. You have given me a lot of trouble. People are laughing at my railway, and I don't like that at all. I'm very sorry, sir, said James. I will try hard to behave. That's a good engine, said the Fat Controller. I want you to pull some trucks for me. James was delighted and puffed away. Here are your trucks, James, said Thomas. Have you got some bootlaces ready? And he ran off, laughing. Oh, said the trucks. We want a proper engine, not a red monster. James took no notice and started as soon as the guard was ready. Come along, he puffed. We won't, screamed the trucks. But James didn't care, and he pulled the screeching trucks sternly out of the station. Trucks tried hard to make him give up, but he still kept on. Sometimes their brakes would slip on, and sometimes their axles would run hot, and each time the trouble had to be put right. And each time James would start again, determined not to let them beat him. Give up, you can't pull us, you can't, called the trucks. I can and I will, puffed James, and slowly but surely he pulled them along the line. At last they saw Gordon's hill. Look out for trouble, James, warned his driver. We'll go fast and get them up before they know it. Don't let them stop you. So James went faster, and soon they were halfway up. I'm doing it, he panted. Will the top never come? Then, with a sudden jerk, it all came easier. I've done it, he puffed. Hooray! It's easy now. But his driver shut off steam. They've done it again. We've left our tail behind. Look. The last trucks were running backwards down the hill. The coupling had snapped. But the guard stopped the trucks and got out to warn approaching engines. That's why it was easy, said James, as he backed the other trucks carefully down. What silly things trucks are. There might have been an accident. Shall I help you, James? Called Edward. No, thank you, answered James. I'll pull them myself. Good. Don't let them beat you. You're doing well, whistled Edward, as James slowly struggled up the hill. I can do it, he puffed. He pulled and puffed as hard as he could. I've done it, he panted. They reached their station safely, and James was resting in the yard when Edward pulled up. Peep, peep, he whistled. Then James saw the Fat Controller. Oh dear, what will he say, he asked himself. But the Fat Controller was smiling. I was in Edward's train and I saw everything, he said. You've made the most troublesome trucks on the line behave. After that, you deserve to keep your red coat. One night, Henry and Gordon were alone with James. Although the Fat Controller was beginning to think well of him, whenever a chance came, the other engines would talk of nothing but bootlaces. "Remember the time one had to be used to get you out of trouble, James?" they would tease. James tried to get his own back, talking about engines who got shut up in tunnels and stuck on hills. But they wouldn't listen. "You talk too much, little James," said Gordon. "A fine, strong engine like me has something to talk about. I'm the only engine who can pull the express. When I'm not there, they need 2 engines. Think of that. I've pulled expresses for years and have never once lost my way. I seem to know the right line by instinct." Every wise engine knows, of course, that the signalman works the points to make engines run on the right lines, but Gordon was so proud he had forgotten. "Wake up, James," said Gordon next morning. "It's nearly time for the express." "What are you doing? Odd jobs?" "Oh, well, we all have to begin somewhere, don't we? Run along now and get my coaches. Don't be late." James went to get Gordon's coaches. They were all shining with lovely new paint. He was careful not to bump them, and they followed him smoothly into the station, singing happily, "We're going away, we're going away." "I wish I was going with you," said James. "I should love to pull the express and go flying along the line." Gordon, with much noise and blowing of steam, got ready to back onto the train. The Fat Controller was on the train with other important people, and as soon as they heard the guard's whistle, Gordon started. Look at me now, he puffed, and the coaches glided after him. Poop, 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 poop. Goodbye, little James, see you tomorrow. James watched the train disappear and then went back to work. He pushed some trucks into their proper sidings and went to fetch the coaches for another train. James had just brought the coaches to the platform when he heard a mournful noise. There was Gordon trying to sidle into the station without being noticed. "Hello, Gordon. Is it tomorrow?" asked James. Gordon didn't answer. He just let off steam feebly. "Did you lose your way, Gordon?" said James. "No, it was lost for me. I was switched off the main line onto the loop. I had to go all round and back again." "Perhaps it was instinct," said James. Meanwhile, all the passengers hurried to the booking office. "We want our money back," they shouted. But the Fat Controller climbed on a trolley and blew the guard's whistle, so loudly that they all stopped to look at him. Then he promised them a new train at once. "Gordon can't do it," he said. "Will you pull it for us, James?" "Yes, sir, I'll try." So James was coupled on and everyone got in. "Do your best, James," said the Fat Controller. Come along, puffed James. You're pulling as well, sang the coaches. Bridges and stations flashed by, the passengers cheered, and they soon reached the station. Everyone said thank you to James, and the Fat Controller was very impressed. "Well done," he said. "Would you like to pull the express sometimes?" "Yes, please," answered James. Next day, when James came by, Gordon was pushing trucks. "I like some quiet work for a change," he said. "I'm teaching these trucks manners. You did well with those coaches, I hear." "Good, we'll show them." And he gave his trucks a bump. James and Gordon are now good friends. James sometimes takes the express to give Gordon a rest. Gordon never talks about bootlaces, and they are both quite agreed on the subject of trucks. Thomas the Tank Engine is very proud of his branch line. He thinks it's the most important part of the whole railway. His two coaches, Annie and Clarabelle, agree with him. Annie can only take passengers, but Clarabelle can take passengers, luggage, and the guard. They are both old and need new paint, but Thomas loves them very much. As they run backwards and forwards along the line, they sing songs to each other. When Thomas starts from a station, he sings, "Oh, come along, we're rather late. Oh, come along, we're rather late." And the coaches sing, "We're coming along, we're coming along." They don't mind what Thomas says to them, because they know he is trying to please the fat controller. And they know, too, that if Thomas is cross, he's not cross with them. One day they had to wait for Henry's train, which made Thomas very cross. How can I run my line properly if Henry is always late? He doesn't realize that the fat controller depends on me. Thomas whistled impatiently. He wanted to leave, but he had to wait for Henry's passengers. At last, Henry came. "Where have you been, lazybones?" asked Thomas. "Oh dear, my system is out of order. No one understands my case. You don't know what I suffer," moaned Henry. "Rubbish," said Thomas. "You're too fat. You need exercise." The guard blew his whistle, and Thomas started so quickly that he left him behind. The guard waved his red flag to stop Thomas, but he was well on his way, steaming out of the station. Come along, puffed Thomas. But Clarabel didn't want to come. "I've lost my nice guard. I've lost my nice guard," she sobbed. Annie tried to tell Thomas what had happened. "We haven't a guard. We haven't a guard." But he was hurrying and wouldn't listen. Annie and Clarabel tried to put on their brakes, but they couldn't without the guard. "Where is our guard? Where is our guard?" they cried. But Thomas didn't stop till they came to a signal. "Bother that signal," said Thomas. "What's the matter?" "I don't know," said his driver. "The guard will tell us in a minute." They waited and waited, but the guard didn't come. "Peep, peep, peep, peep." "Where is the guard?" whistled Thomas. "We've left him behind," sobbed Annie and Clarabel together. Everyone looked, and there was the guard running as fast as he could along the line, with his flags in one hand and his whistle in the other. He was very hot, so he had a drink, then told them all about it. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Guard," said Thomas. "It wasn't your fault, Thomas," he replied. "Look, the signal is down. We can go. Let's make up for lost time." Annie and Clarabel were so pleased to have their guard again that they sang, "As fast as you like, as fast as you like," to Thomas all the way. They reached the end of the line quicker than ever before. When Thomas puffed along his branch line, he always looked forward to something special. The sight of the river. As he rumbled over the bridge, he would see people fishing. Thomas often wanted to stay and watch, but his driver said no. What would the fat controller say if we were late? Every time he met another engine, he would say, "I want to fish." But they all had the same answer. "Engines don't go fishing." Silly stick in the muds, thought Thomas. One day he stopped as usual to take in water at the station by the river. "Out of order." "Bother," said Thomas. "I'm thirsty." "Never mind," said his driver. "We'll get some water from the river." They found a bucket and some rope and went to the bridge. Then the driver let the bucket down to the water. The bucket was old and had 5 holes. So they had to fill it, pull it up and empty it into Thomas's tank as quickly as they could, several times over. They finished at last. That's good, puffed Thomas, and Annie and Clarabel ran happily behind. Suddenly, Thomas began to feel a pain in his boiler. Steam began to hiss from his safety valve in an alarming way. "There's too much steam," said his driver. "Oh dear," groaned Thomas. "I'm going to burst! I'm going to burst!" They damped down his fire and struggled on. "I've got such a pain! I've got such a pain!" Thomas hissed. They stopped just outside the last station, uncoupled Annie and Clarabel, and ran Thomas, who was still hissing fit to burst, on a siding right out of the way. Then while the guard telephoned for an engine inspector, the driver found notices in large letters, which he hung on Thomas in front and behind. "Danger! Keep away!" Soon the inspector and the Fat Controller arrived. "Cheer up, Thomas," they said. "We'll soon put you right." The driver told them what had happened. "So the feed pipe is blocked," said the inspector. "I'll just look in the tanks." He climbed up and peered in. Then he came down. "Excuse me, sir. Please look in the tank and tell me what you see." "Certainly, Inspector," replied the Fat Controller. He clambered up, looked in, and nearly fell off in surprise. "Inspector," he whispered, "can you see fish?" "Gracious goodness me, how did the fish get there, driver?" "We must have fished them from the river with our bucket," replied Thomas's driver. "Well, Thomas, so you and your driver have been fishing, but fish don't suit you. We must get them out." They all took turns at fishing in Thomas's tank, while the Fat Controller looked on and told them how to do it. When they had caught all the fish, they had a lovely picnic supper of fish and chips. "That was good," said the Fat Controller. "But fish don't suit you, Thomas, so you mustn't do it again." "No, sir, I won't," said Thomas sadly. "Engines don't go fishing. It's too uncomfortable." Autumn had come to the island of Sodor. The fields were changing from yellow stubble to brown earth, and a tractor was hard at work as Thomas puffed along. Later, Thomas saw the tractor close by. "Hello," said the tractor. "I'm Terrence. I'm ploughing." "I'm Thomas. I'm pulling a train." "What ugly wheels you've got." "They're not ugly. They're caterpillars," said Terrence. "I can go anywhere. I don't need rails." "I don't want to go anywhere," said Thomas. "I like my rails, thank you." Winter came with dark clouds full of snow. "I don't like it," said Thomas's driver. "A heavy fall is coming. I hope it doesn't stop us." "Huh," said Thomas. "Soft stuff, nothing to it." And he puffed on, feeling cold but confident. They finished their journey safely, but by now the country was covered. "You'll need your snowplow for the next journey, Thomas," said his driver. "Puh! Snow is silly soft stuff. It won't stop me. The snowplow was heavy and uncomfortable and made Thomas cross. He shook it and he banged it, and when they got back, it was so damaged that the driver had to take it off. "You're a very naughty engine," he said to Thomas. Next morning, Thomas's driver and fireman came early and worked hard to mend the snowplow, but they couldn't make it fit. Thomas was pleased. "I shan't have to wear it, I shan't have to wear it," he puffed to Annie and Clarabel. But they were rather worried. "I hope it's all right, I hope it's all right," they whispered to each other. The driver was worried too. "It's not bad here," he said to the fireman, "but it's sure to be deep in the valley." "Silly soft stuff," puffed Thomas. "I didn't need that stupid old thing yesterday, and I shan't today. Snow can't stop me." He rushed into a tunnel thinking how clever he was, but there was trouble ahead. "Cinders and ashes," said Thomas. "I'm stuck." And he was. "Back, Thomas, back," said his driver. Thomas tried, but his wheels spun and he couldn't move. The guard went back for help, while everyone else tried to dig the snow away. But as fast as they dug, more snow slipped down until Thomas was nearly buried. "Oh, my wheels and coupling rods! I shall have to stop here till I'm frozen. What a silly engine I am!" And Thomas began to cry. At last a bus came to rescue the passengers. And then, who should come to Thomas's rescue but Terrence? Snow never worries him. He pulled the empty coaches away, then came back for Thomas. Thomas's wheels were clear but still spun when he tried to move. Terrence tugged and slipped and slipped and tugged, and at last dragged Thomas clear of the snow, ready for the journey home. "Thank you, Terrence. Your caterpillars are splendid," said Thomas. "I hope you'll be sensible now, Thomas," said his driver. "I'll try," said Thomas, and he puffed humbly away. Thomas was waiting at a junction when a bus arrived. "Hello," said Thomas. "Who are you?" "I'm Bertie. Who are you?" "I'm Thomas. I run this branch line." "So you're Thomas, eh? I remember now. You got stuck in the snow." But there was trouble ahead. "Cinders and ashes," said Thomas. "I'm stuck." And he was. "I took your passengers, and Terrence the tractor pulled you out. I've come to help you with your passengers today." "Help me," said Thomas. "I can go faster than you." "You can't," said Bertie. "I can," huffed Thomas. "I'll race you," said Bertie. The drivers agreed to the race going ahead. The station master said, "Are you ready? Go." Thomas never could go fast at first, and Bertie drew in front. "Why don't you go fast? Why don't you go fast?" called Annie and Clarabel. Wait and see," hissed Thomas. "He's a long way ahead," they wailed. But Thomas didn't mind. He'd remembered the level crossing. There was Bertie fuming at the gates, while they sailed gaily through. "Goodbye, Bertie," called Thomas. After that, the road left the railway, so they couldn't see Bertie. Then they had to stop at the station to let off passengers. Pip, pip, pip! Quickly, please, called Thomas. And off they went again. Come along, sang Thomas. We're coming along, sang Annie and Clarabel. Hurry, 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 panted Thomas. Then he looked ahead. There was Bertie tooting triumphantly on his horn. Oh, dearie me, groaned Thomas. Steady, Thomas, said his driver. We'll beat Bertie yet. We'll beat Bertie yet, echoed Annie and Clarabel. We'll do it, panted Thomas. Oh, bother, there's a station. Then he heard Bertie. Goodbye, Thomas. You must be tired. Sorry I can't stop. We buses have to work, you know. Goodbye. Oh dear, thought Thomas. We've lost. But he felt better after a drink. The signal dropped. Hurrah, we're off! Hurrah, we're off, puffed Thomas. As they crossed the bridge, they heard an impatient honk, honk. There was Bertie waiting at the traffic lights. He started with a roar and chased on after Thomas again. Now Thomas reached his full speed. Bertie tried hard, but Thomas was too fast. Whistling triumphantly, he plunged into the tunnel, leaving Bertie toiling far behind. I've done it, panted Thomas. We've done it, hooray, chanted Annie and Clarabel as they whooshed into the last station. Everyone was there to celebrate Thomas's victory, but they gave Bertie a big welcome too. Well done, Thomas, said Bertie, that was fun. But to beat you over that hill, I should have to grow wings and be an aeroplane. They now keep each other very busy. They often talk about their race, but Bertie's passengers don't like being bounced like peas in a frying pan. And the Fat Controller has warned Thomas not to race at dangerous speeds. So although, between you and me, they would like to have another race, I don't think they ever will. Do you? Henry and Gordon were lonely when Thomas left the yard to run his branch line. They missed him very much. They had more work to do and had to fetch their own coaches. They didn't like that. James grumbled too. We get no rest, they all complained. But the coaches only laughed. You're lazy and slack, they answered. Altogether, the engines were causing the Fat Controller a great deal of trouble. The big stations at both ends of the line each have a turntable. The Fat Controller had made them so that the tender engines can be turned round, because it is dangerous for them to go fast backwards. Tank engines like Thomas don't need turntables. They can go just as well backwards as forwards. But to hear Gordon talk, you would have thought that the Fat Controller had given him a tender just to show how important he was. You don't understand, little Thomas. We tender engines have a position to keep up. It doesn't matter where you go, but we are important. And for the Fat Controller to make us shunt trucks, fetch coaches, and go on some of those dirty sidings, it's not the proper thing. Thomas chuckled and went off with Annie and Clarabel. Disgraceful, Gordon hissed as he ran backwards to the turntable. The turntable was in a windy place close to the sea, and if he was not on it just right, he put it out of balance and made it difficult to turn. Today, Gordon was in a bad temper, and the wind was blowing fiercely. His driver tried to make him stop in the right place, but but Gordon wasn't trying. The fireman tried to turn the handle, but Gordon's weight and the strong wind prevented him. "It's no good," they said at last. "Your tender upsets the balance. If you were a nice tank engine, you'd be all right. Now you'll have to pull the next train backwards." "Look," called some boys, "there's a new tank engine." "Oh, it's only Gordon back to front." "Hello," called Thomas, "playing tank engines? Sensible engine. Take my advice, scrap your tender and have a nice bunker." Gordon said nothing. Even James laughed when he saw him. "Take care," hissed Gordon, "you might stick too." "No fear," chuckled James, "I'm not so fat as you." "I mustn't stick," thought James. He stopped on just the right place to balance the table. It could now swing easily. Gordon arrived in time to see everything. James turned much too easily. The wind puffed him round like a top. He couldn't stop. "Well, well," said Gordon, "are you playing roundabouts?" Poor James, feeling quite giddy, rolled off to the shed without a word. That night, the three engines had an indignation meeting. "It's shameful to treat tender engines like this. Gordon has to go backwards and people think he's a tank engine. James spins round like a top and everyone laughs at us. And to add to that, the fat controller makes us all shunt in dirty sidings. Blech!" "Listen," said Gordon. He whispered something to the others. "We'll do it tomorrow. The fat controller will look silly. The engines are decided to go on strike." The fat controller sat in his office listening to the noise outside. The passengers were angry. The station master came in. "There's trouble in the shed, sir. Henry is sulking, there's no train, and the passengers are saying this is a bad railway." "Indeed," said the fat controller, "we cannot allow that." He found Gordon, James, and Henry looking very cross. "Come along, Henry, it's time your train was ready." "Henry's not going," said Gordon. "We won't shunt like common tank engines. That was Thomas's job. We are important tender engines. You fetch our coaches and we will pull them. Tender engines don't shunt." "Oh, indeed," said the fat controller. "We'll see about that. Engines on my railway do as they are told." And he hurried away to find Edward. The yard has never been the same since Thomas left to run his branch line, he thought sadly. Edward was shunting. "Leave those trucks, please, Edward," said the fat controller. "I want you to push coaches for me in the yard." "Thank you, sir, that will be a nice change." "That's a good engine. Off you go, then." So Edward found coaches for the three engines, and that day the trains ran as usual. But next morning Edward looked unhappy. Gordon came clanking past, hissing rudely. "Bless me," said the fat controller, "what a noise." "They all hiss me, sir," answered Edward. "They say tender engines don't shunt, and last night they said I have black wheels. I haven't, have I, sir?" "No, Edward, you have nice blue ones, and I'm proud of you. Tender engines do shunt, but all the same, we do need another tank engine here." He went to a workshop, and they showed him all sorts of engines. At last he saw a smart little green engine with 4 wheels. "That's the one," he thought. "If I choose you, will you work hard?" "Oh, sir, yes, sir." That's a good engine. I'll call you Percy." "Yes, sir, thank you, sir," said Percy, and the Fat Controller brought him back to the yard. "Edward," he called, "here's Percy. Will you show him everything?" Percy soon learned what he had to do, and they had a happy afternoon. Then Henry came by, hissing as usual. "Chee!" went Percy. Henry jumped and ran back to the shed. "How beautifully you wheeshed him," laughed Edward. "I can't wheesh like that." "Oh," said Percy, "that's nothing. You should hear them in the workshop. You have to wheesh loudly to make yourself heard." Next morning, Thomas arrived. "The Fat Controller sent for me. I expect he wants help," he said to Edward. "Shh, here he comes," replied Edward. "Well done, Thomas. You've been quick. Listen, Henry, Gordon and James are sulking. They say they won't shunt like common tank engines, so I have shut them up and I want you both to run the line for a while." "Common tank engines indeed," snorted Thomas. "We'll show them. And Percy will help too." "Oh, sir, yes, sir, please, sir," answered Percy. Edward and Thomas worked the main line, greeting each other as they passed by. Percy puffed along the branch line. Thomas was anxious about Annie and Clarabel, but both driver and guard promised to take care of them. There were fewer trains, but the passengers didn't mind. They knew the three other engines were having a lesson. Gordon, James and Henry were cold, lonely and miserable. They wished now they hadn't been so silly. Henry, James and Gordon were miserable. They had been shut up for several days for being naughty and longed to be let out again. At last the Fat Controller arrived. "I hope you are sorry," he said, "and understand that you are not so important after all. We have a new tank engine called Percy who helps pull coaches, and Thomas and Edward have worked the main line nicely. But I will let you out now if you promise to be good." "Yes, sir," said the three engines, "we will." "That's right, but please remember that this no shunting nonsense must stop." He then told Percy, Edward and Thomas that they could go and play on the branch line for a few days. And they ran off happily to find Annie and Clarabel at the junction. The two coaches were so pleased to see Thomas again. Edward and Percy played with trucks. "Stop, stop, stop," screamed the trucks as they were pushed into their proper sidings. But the two engines laughed and went on shunting till the trucks were tidily arranged. Next, Edward took some empty trucks to the quarry. Percy was left alone. He didn't mind that a bit. He liked watching trains and being cheeky to the other engines. "Hurry, hurry, hurry," he would call, and they got very cross. After a great deal of shunting, Percy was waiting for the signalman to set the point so that he could get back to the yard. He was eager to work, but was being rather careless and not paying attention. Edward had warned Percy, "Be careful on the main line. Whistle to the signalman you are there." But Percy didn't remember to whistle, so the busy signalman forgot him. Percy waited and waited. The points were still against him, so he couldn't move. Then he looked along the main line. Peep, peep! He whistled in horror, for rushing straight towards him was Gordon with the express. "Oh!" groaned Gordon. "Get out of my way!" Percy opened his eyes. Gordon had stopped with Percy's buffers a few inches from his own. But Percy had begun to move. "I won't stay here. I'll run away," he puffed. He went straight through Edward's station and was so frightened that he ran right up Gordon's hill without stopping. After that, he was tired, but he couldn't stop. He had no driver to shut off steam and apply the brakes. I want to stop, he puffed. The man in the signal box saw Percy was in trouble, so kindly set the points. Percy puffed wearily onto a nice empty siding, ending in a big bank of earth. He was too tired now to care where he went. I want to stop, I have stopped, he puffed thankfully. Never mind, Percy, said the workman as they dug him out. You shall have a drink and some coal, and then you'll feel better. Presently, Gordon arrived. Well done, Percy. You started so quickly that you stopped a nasty accident. I'm sorry I was cheeky, said Percy. You were clever to stop. Then Gordon helped pull Percy out from the bank. Percy is still cheeky because he is that sort of engine, but he is always most careful when he goes on the main line. One morning, Henry was feeling very sorry for himself. Sometimes he could pull trains, but sometimes he felt he had no strength at all. I suffered dreadfully, and no one cares. Rubbish, Henry, snorted James. You don't work hard enough. The Fat Controller spoke to him too. You're too expensive, Henry. You had lots of new parts and new paint too, but they've done you no good. If we can't make you better, we must get another engine instead of you. This made Henry, his driver and his fireman very sad. The Fat Controller was waiting when Henry came to the platform. He had taken off his hat and coat and put on overalls. Henry managed to start, but his fireman was not satisfied. Henry is a bad steamer, he said to the Fat Controller. I build up his fire, but it doesn't give enough heat. Henry tried very hard, but it was no good. He didn't have enough steam and came to a stop outside Edward's station. Oh dear, thought Henry, I shall have to go away. Oh dear, oh dear. All he could do was to go slowly onto a siding, and Edward took charge of the train. The Fat Controller and fireman went on discussing Henry's troubles. What do you think is wrong, fireman? Asked the Fat Controller. Excuse me, sir, he answered, but the fact is the coal is wrong. We've had a poor lot lately, and today it's worse. The other engines can manage, they have big fireboxes. Henry's is small and can't make the heat. With Welsh coal, he'd be a different engine. It's expensive, said the Fat Controller, but Henry must have a fair chance. James shall go and fetch some. When the Welsh coal came, Henry's driver and fireman were excited. Now we'll show them, Henry, old fellow. They carefully made his fire, putting large lumps of coal like a wall round the outside. Then the glowing middle part was covered with smaller lumps. You're spoiling my fire, complained Henry. Wait and see, said the fireman. We'll have a roaring fire. Just when we want it. The fireman was right. When Henry reached the platform, the water was boiling nicely, and he had to let off steam. How are you, Henry? Peep, peep, whistled Henry. I feel fine. Have you a good fire, driver? Never better, sir, and plenty of steam. No record breaking, warned the Fat Controller. Don't push him too hard. Henry won't need pushing, sir. I'll have to hold him back. lovely day. He had never felt so well in his life. He wanted to go fast, but his driver wouldn't let him. "Steady, old fellow," he would say. "There's plenty of time." They arrived early at the station. Thomas puffed in. "Where have you been, lazybones?" asked Henry. "Oh, I can't wait for dawdling tank engines like you. Goodbye." "Whoosh," said Thomas to Annie and Clarabel. "Have you ever seen anything like it?" Both Annie and Clarabel agreed that they never had. One winter evening, Henry's driver said, "We'll be out early tomorrow. We've got to take the flying kipper." "Don't tell Gordon, but I think if we pull the kipper nicely, the Fat Controller will let us pull the express. The special coal they gave you is working well." "Hurrah!" cried Henry. "That will be lovely." All kinds of ships use the harbour at the big station by the sea. There are passenger ships, cargo ships, and fishing boats also come here. They unload their fish on the quay. Some of it goes to shops in the town, and the rest in a special train to other places far away. This is the train the railwaymen call the Flying Kipper. Henry was ready at 5 o'clock. There was snow and frost. Men hustled and shouted, loading the vans with crates of fish. The last door banged, the guard showed his green lamp. The Flying Kipper was ready to go. Come on, don't be silly, puffed Henry to the vans. The vans shuddered and groaned, trock, trick, all right. That is better, puffed Henry. Clouds of smoke and steam poured from his funnel into the cold air, and the fire's light shone brightly. Hurry, panted Henry. They were going well. The light grew better. Signal light shone green as they passed. Then a yellow signal appeared ahead. His driver prepared to stop, but the home signal was down. "All clear, Henry. Away we go." They couldn't know the points from the main line to a siding were frozen, and the home signal should have been set at danger, but snow had forced it down. A goods train was waiting in the siding to let the Flying Kipper pass, and the driver and fireman were drinking cocoa in the brake van. "The kipper is due," said the guard. "Who cares?" said the fireman. "This is good cocoa." The driver got up. "Come on, fireman, back to our engine." They got out just in time. Henry's driver and fireman had jumped clear before the crash, but Henry lay dazed and surprised. The Fat Controller came to see him. "The signal was down, sir," said Henry. "Cheer up, Henry, it wasn't your fault. Ice and snow caused the accident. I'm sending you to Crewe, a fine place for sick engines. They'll give you a new shape and a larger firebox. You'll feel a different engine and won't need special coal anymore. Won't that be nice?" "Yes, sir," said Henry doubtfully. Henry liked being at Crewe, but was glad to come home. A crowd of people waited to see him arrive in his new shape. He looked so splendid and strong that they gave him 3 cheers. "Peep, peep," he whistled. "Thank you very much." I am sorry to say that a lot of little children are often late for school because they wait to see Henry go by. They often see him pulling the express. He does it so well that Gordon is jealous. But that's another story. Gordon was cross. Why should Henry have a new shape, he grumbled. A shape good enough for me is good enough for him. He goes gallivanting off to Crewe, leaving us to do his work, and comes back saying how happy he feels. It's disgraceful. And there's another thing. Henry whistles too much. No respectable engine ever whistles loudly at stations. It isn't wrong, but we just don't do it. Poor Henry didn't feel happy anymore. Never mind, whispered Percy. I'm glad you're home again. I like your whistling. Goodbye, Henry, called Gordon. We're glad to have you with us again, but remember what I said. Later, Henry stopped at Edward's station. Hello, Henry, said Edward. You look splendid. I was pleased to hear your happy whistle yesterday. Thank you, Edward, smiled Henry. Shh, shh. Can you hear something? It sounds like Gordon, said Edward, and it ought to be Gordon. But Gordon never whistles like that. It was Gordon. He came rushing down the hill at a tremendous rate. He didn't look at Henry, and he didn't look at Edward. He screamed straight through the station and disappeared. Well, said Edward. It isn't wrong, chuckled Henry, but we just don't do it. And he told Edward what Gordon had said. Meanwhile, Gordon screeched along the line. The noise was awful. At the station, everyone held their ears. The fat controller held his ears too. Take him away, he bellowed, and stop that noise! Gordon puffed sadly away, but he wouldn't stop whistling until two fitters climbed up and knocked his whistle valve in place. That night, Gordon slunk into the shed. He was glad it was empty. It isn't wrong, murmured Henry to no one in particular, but we just don't do it. No one mentioned whistles. Next morning, Henry was enjoying himself enormously. I feel so well, he sang. Trickety-trock, hummed his coaches. Then he saw some boys on a bridge. Peep, peep, hello, he whistled. Oh, he called. The boys didn't wave and take his number. They thought it fun to drop stones on him instead. They've broken our glass, sobbed the coaches. The passengers weren't hurt, but they were cross. Call the police. No, said the driver, leave it to Henry and me. What will you do, they asked. Can you keep a secret? Yes. Well then, said the driver, Henry is going to sneeze at those boys. Lots of people were waiting at the station just before the bridge. They wanted to see what would happen. Henry has plenty of ashes, said the driver. Please keep all windows shut till we have passed the bridge. Henry is as excited as we are, aren't you, old fellow? Henry was feeling stuffed up. Soon they could see the boys, and they all had stones. Are you ready, Henry, said his driver. Sneeze hard when I tell you. Now, he said. Achoo, shoo! Well done, Henry, laughed his driver. Henry went home very pleased with himself. He had taught Gordon and silly boys a lesson with a whistle and a sneeze. Toby is a tram engine. He has cow catchers and side plates and doesn't look like a steam engine at all. He takes trucks from farms and villages to the main line and is cheerful to everyone he meets. He has a coach called Henrietta, who has seen better days. It's not fair at all, she grumbles, remembering that she used to be full and 9 trucks would rattle behind her. Now there are only 3 or 4, but the farms and factories send their goods mostly by lorry. Toby is always careful. The cars, buses and lorries often have accidents. Toby hasn't had an accident for years. The buses are crowded and Henrietta is empty. A lady and a stout gentleman stood on Toby's platform. He was, of course, the fat controller, but Toby didn't know this yet. "Come on, grandfather," cried the children. "Do look at this engine." "That's a tram engine, Stephen," said the fat controller. "Is it electric?" asked Bridget. "Hush!" hissed Toby. "Shh, shh," said her brother. "You've offended him." "But trams are electric, aren't they?" "They are mostly, but this is a steam tram." "May we go in it, grandfather? Please?" "Stop," said the fat controller to the guard. They all scrambled into Henrietta. "Hip, hip, hooray!" chanted Henrietta. But Toby did not sing. "Electric indeed! Electric indeed!" he snorted. He was very hurt. "What is your name?" asked the fat controller. "Toby, sir." "Thank you, Toby, for a very nice ride." "Thank you, sir," said Toby. He felt better now. This gentleman, he thought, is a gentleman who knows how to speak to engines. The children came every day for a fortnight. Sometimes they rode with the guard, sometimes in empty trucks. On the last day of all, the driver invited them into his cab. All were sorry when they had to go away, and the fat controller and his family thanked everyone. "Come again soon," replied Toby. We will," called the children, and they waved till Toby was out of sight. The months passed. Toby had few trucks and fewer passengers. "Our last day, Toby," said his driver one morning. "The manager says we must close tomorrow." That day, everyone wanted the chance of a last ride. The passengers joked and sang, but Toby and his driver wished they wouldn't. "Goodbye, Toby," said the passengers afterwards. "We are sorry your line is closing down." "So am I," said Toby. Nobody wants me, Toby thought, and went unhappily to sleep. Next morning, the shed was flung open, and he woke with a start to see his driver waving a piece of paper. "Wake up, Toby," they shouted, "and listen to this. It's a letter from the stout gentleman." Toby listened but I mustn't tell you any more, or I shall spoil the next story. There's a line to a quarry at the end of Thomas's branch. It goes for some distance along the road. Thomas was always very careful to whistle here in case anyone was coming. Early one morning, a large policeman was sitting close to the line. Thomas liked policemen. He had been a great friend of the constable who had just retired. "Peep, peep," he whistled. "Good morning." Thomas expected that the new constable would be friendly too, but was sorry to see that he didn't look friendly at all. He was red in the face and very cross. Disgraceful, he spluttered. I didn't sleep a wink last night. It was so quiet, and now engines come whistling suddenly behind me. I'm sorry, sir, said Thomas. I only said good morning. A policeman pointed to Thomas. Where's your cowcatcher, he asked. But I don't catch cows, sir. Don't be funny, snapped the policeman. He looked at Thomas's wheels. No side plates either, and he wrote in his notebook. Engines going on public roads must have their wheels covered and a cowcatcher in front to protect people and animals from being dragged under the wheels if they stray onto the line. You haven't, so you are dangerous. Rubbish, said Thomas's driver. We've been along here hundreds of times and never had an accident. That makes it worse, the policeman answered. He wrote regular lawbreaker in his book. Thomas puffed sadly away. The fat controller was having breakfast. He was eating toast and marmalade. The butler came in. Excuse me, sir, you are wanted on the telephone. Bother that telephone, said the fat controller. I'm sorry, my dear, he said to his wife. Thomas is in trouble with the police, and I must go at once. At the station, Thomas's driver told the fat controller what had happened. Dangerous to the public, indeed. We'll see about that. The fat controller spoke to the policeman. But however much he argued with him, it was no good. The law is the law, he said, and we can't change it. The fat controller felt exhausted. I'm sorry, driver, he said. It's no use arguing with policemen. We will have to make those cowcatcher things for Thomas, I suppose. Everyone will laugh, sir, said Thomas. They'll say I look like a tram. The fat controller stirred. Then he laughed. Well done, Thomas. Why didn't I think of it before? We want a tram engine. When I was on my holiday, I met a nice little engine called Toby. He takes trucks from the farms, but the lorries are taking over most of his work and he needs a change. He has cowcatchers and side plates. I'll write to his controller at once. A few days later, Toby arrived. That's a good engine, said the fat controller. I see you've brought your coach, Henrietta. You don't mind, do you, sir? Asked Toby. The station master wanted to use her as a hen house, and that would never do. No, indeed, said the fat controller. We couldn't allow that. Toby made the silly trucks behave even better than Thomas did.
Oi, you!
At first, Thomas was jealous, but he was so pleased when Toby rang his bell and frightened the policeman, they've been firm friends ever since. Toby and Henrietta are enjoying their new job on the island of Sodor, but they do look old-fashioned and need new paint. James was very rude whenever he saw them. Ugh, what dirty objects, he would say. At last, Toby lost patience. James, he asked, why are you red? I am a splendid engine, answered James. Ready for anything. You never see my paint dirty. Oh, said Toby innocently, that's why you once needed bootlaces, to be ready, I suppose. James went redder than ever and snorted off. It was such an insult to be reminded of the time a bootlace had been used to mend a hole in his coaches. At the end of the line, James left his coaches and got ready for his next train. It was a slow goods, stopping at every station to pick up and set down trucks. James hated slow goods trains. Dirty trucks from dirty sidings. Blech! Starting with only a few, he picked up more and more trucks at each station till he had a long train. At first, the trucks behaved well, but James bumped them so crossly that they were determined to pay him back. Presently, they approached the top of Gordon's Hill. Heavy goods trains halt here to pin down their brakes. James had had an accident with trucks before and should have remembered this. "Wait, James, wait," said the driver, but James wouldn't wait. He was too busy thinking what he would say to Toby when they next met. The truck's chance had come. "Hurrah, hurrah," they laughed, and banging their buffers, they pushed him down the hill. On, yelled the trucks. "I've got to stop! I've got to stop!" groaned James. Through the station they thundered. Disaster lay ahead. Something sticky splashed all over James. He had run into 2 tar wagons and was black from smokebox to cab. He was more dirty than hurt, but the tar wagons and some trucks were all to pieces. Toby and Percy were sent to help and came as quickly as they could. "Look here, Percy," exclaimed Toby. "Whatever is that dirty object?" "That's James, didn't you know?" "It's James's shape," said Toby. "But James is a splendid red engine and you never see his paint dirty." James pretended he hadn't heard. Toby and Percy cleared away the unhurt trucks and helped James home. The fat controller met them. "Well done, Percy and Toby." He turned to James. "Fancy letting your trucks run away. I am surprised. You're not fit to be seen. You must be cleaned at once. Toby shall have a new coat of paint." "Please, sir, can Henrietta have one too?" said Toby. "Certainly, Toby." "Oh, thank you, sir. She will be pleased." All James could do was watch Toby as he ran off happily with the news. Gordon was resting in a siding. "Sometimes," he thought, "it's really tiring to be such a large and splendid engine. One does have to keep up appearances so." "Beep, beep, beep, beep. Hello, fat face," whistled Henry. "What cheeks," spluttered Gordon. "That Henry is too big for his wheels. Fancy speaking to me like that. Me, who has never had an accident." "Aren't jammed whistles and burst safety valves accidents?" asked Percy innocently. "No, indeed. High spirits might happen to any engine. But to come off the rails like Henry did, well, I ask you, is it right? Is it decent?" Then it was Henry's turn to take the express. Gordon watched him getting ready. "Be careful, Henry. You're not pulling the flying kipper now. Mind you keep on the rails today." Henry went off in a huff, and Gordon yawned and went to sleep. But not for long. "Wake up, Gordon," said his driver. "A special train's coming and we're to pull it." "Is it coaches or trucks?" "Trucks," said his driver. "Trucks," said Gordon. "Puh!" Gordon's fire was slow to start, so Edward had to push Gordon to the turntable to get him facing the right way. I won't go, grumbled Gordon. Don't be silly, puffed Edward. At last Gordon was on the turntable. The movement had shaken his fire. It was now burning nicely and making steam. Gordon was cross and didn't care what he did. He waited till the table was halfway round. I'll show them, he hissed. He moved slowly forward to jam the table, but he couldn't stop himself and slithered into a ditch. Ooh, she hissed. Get me out! Get me out! Not a hope, said his driver and fireman. You're stuck, you silly great engine. Don't you understand that? They telephoned the Fat Controller. So Gordon didn't want to take the special train and ran into a ditch. What's that you say? The special's waiting. Tell Edward to take it, please. And Gordon? Oh, leave him where he is. We haven't time to bother with him now. On the other side of the ditch, some little boys were chattering. Coo, doesn't he look silly? They'll never get him out. They began to sing. Silly old Gordon fell in a ditch, fell in a ditch, fell in a ditch. Silly old Gordon fell in a ditch, all on a Monday morning. Gordon lay in the ditch all day. Oh dear, he thought, I shall never get out. But that evening they lifted Gordon and made a road of sleepers under his wheels to keep him from the mud. Strong ropes were fastened to his back end, and James and Henry, pulling hard, managed to bring him to safety. Late that night, Gordon crawled home, a sadder and wiser engine. One day, Thomas was at the junction when Gordon shuffled in with some trucks. Phew, remarked Thomas. What a funny smell. Can you smell a smell? I can't smell a smell, said Annie. A funny, musty sort of smell, said Thomas. No one noticed it till you did, grunted Gordon. It must be yours. Not long ago he had fallen into a dirty ditch. Thomas enjoyed teasing him about it. Annie? Clarabelle? Do you know what I think it is? It's ditch water. Before Gordon could answer, Thomas puffed away. Annie and Clarabelle could hardly believe their ears. He's dreadfully rude. I feel quite ashamed. I feel quite ashamed. He's dreadfully rude. And to Thomas they said, you mustn't be rude. You make us ashamed. But Thomas didn't care a bit. That was funny. That was funny, he chuckled. He felt very pleased with himself. Annie and Clarabelle were deeply shocked. They had great respect for Gordon, the big engine. Thomas left the coaches at the station and went off to a mine for some trucks. Long ago, miners digging for lead had made tunnels under the ground. Their roofs are strong enough to hold up trucks, but not the weight of engines. A large notice warns them not to enter the area. Danger! Engines must not pass this board. Silly old board, thought Thomas. He had often tried to pass it, but had never succeeded. But this morning he had made a plan. fireman went to turn the points. Now for my plan, thought Thomas. Pumping the trucks fiercely, he jerked his driver off the footplate and followed them into the siding. "Come back!" yelled his driver. "Fire and smoke," said Thomas. "I am sunk." And he was. "Oh dear," he said, "I am a silly engine." "And a very naughty one too. I saw you," said the Fat Controller. "Please get me out. I won't be naughty again." "I'm not sure. We can't lift you out with a crane. The ground's not firm enough." Let me see. I wonder if Gordon could pull you out." "Yes, sir," said Thomas, but he didn't want to meet Gordon just yet. "Down a mine, is he?" "Ha, ha, ha," laughed Gordon. "What a joke." "Poop, poop, little Thomas. We'll have you out in a couple of puffs." Strong cables were fastened between the two engines. "Are you ready? Heave!" It was a lot harder than they all thought, but at last Thomas was free. "I'm sorry I was cheeky," said Thomas. "That's all right, Thomas. You made me laugh," replied Gordon. "I'm in disgrace." "So am I," said Thomas. "Why, so you are, Thomas. Shall we form an alliance? You help me, and I'll help you." "Right you are," agreed Thomas. "Good, that's settled," rumbled Gordon. And buffer to buffer, the Allies puffed home. It was Christmas on the island of Sodor. All the engines were working hard. Thomas and Toby were busy carrying people and parcels up and down the branch line. Everyone was happy. Only the coaches, Annie and Clarabelle, were complaining. "It's always the same before Christmas," they groaned. "We feel so full, we feel so full." "Oh, come on," said Thomas. "Where's your festive spirit? Christmas Day is almost here." By the side of the track was a lonely little cottage with a familiar figure waving to them. "It's Mrs. Kindly," whistled Thomas. "Peep, peep, Happy Christmas!" Thomas always felt better for seeing her. Christmas just wouldn't be Christmas without Mrs. Kindly. When work was over, Thomas went to see the other engines. All their coats had been polished. "Ha," said Gordon, "just look at us. Your driver will have to work fast to get you as smart as us." "Never mind that," replied Thomas. "I've something important to say. Do you realize it's a whole year since Mrs. Kindly saved us from a nasty accident? You remember when she was ill in bed and—" "Yes, of course," interrupted Edward. "You told us how she waved her red dressing gown out of her window to warn you about a landslide ahead." "And you and Toby gave her presents," Percy joined in. "And the Fat Controller sent her to Bournemouth to get better." "But," said James and Henry together, "the rest of us have never thanked her properly." "Exactly," said Thomas. "So now I think we should all give her a special Christmas party." Everyone was getting very excited, and the drivers felt sure that the Fat Controller would agree, as indeed he did. The engines were all busy making plans when silence fell. The Fat Controller had bad news. "The weather's changed badly. Mrs. Kindly is snowed up. Toby says he'll help to rescue her. You must help too, Thomas. There's no party unless you do." Thomas hated snow, but he said bravely, "I'll try, sir. We must rescue her. We must." "There's a good engine. You and Toby will manage splendidly." Thomas charged the snowdrifts fiercely. Sometimes he swept them aside, sometimes they stuck fast, and the men had to loosen them. But But at the cutting near the cottage, they could go no further. "Look at that!" exclaimed Thomas's fireman. "Peep, peep, peep! Here we are," whistled Thomas. An answering wave came from an upstairs window. Then they heard a familiar sound. "That's Terrence," said Thomas. "He's come to help too." Sure enough, Terrence had a snowplow and was working hard to clear a path to the railway line in safety. At long last, the rescue was complete. Percy took the tired workmen home. Terrence said goodbye to Mrs. Kindly and promised to take care of her cottage as he watched them all set off. The engines made good time. No more snow had fallen, but the yard was dark. Thomas's heart sank. Suddenly, all the lights went on. What a marvelous sight awaited Mrs. Kindly. "Well done," said the Fat Controller. "I'm really proud of you all." Mrs. Kindly especially thanked the smaller engines. "Thomas and Toby are all friends," she said. "And now, Percy, you are my friend too." Percy was very pleased. "3 cheers for Mrs. Kindly," he called. "Peep, peep, peep!" They all whistled.
We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Thomas the Tank Engine and his friends thought it was the best Christmas ever, and Mrs. Kindly could think of nowhere she would rather live than here with them on the island of Sodor.